The Subcommittee on Health will now come to order. Good morning to all of my colleagues, to the witnesses that are here today. We're grateful to you for being here, and to everyone else in the audience that has joined us. The chair now recognizes herself for 5 minutes for an opening statement. Smoking kills. It's the leading cause of preventable death in the United States. Cigarette smoking is responsible for more than 480,000 deaths in the United States each year, and more than 16 million Americans are living with a disease caused by smoking. These health problems cost our country more than $300 billion, with a B, dollars a year. But despite knowing the consequences of smoking for over half a century, we're still raising children who smoke. In 2018, 4.9 million middle and high school students were current users of some type of tobacco product or e-cigarettes. Many of those children will be lifelong smokers. Over 90% of adult smokers began smoking before they turned 21. The tobacco industry knows the best way to continue their business to aggressively target children with their addictive products so that they'll have guaranteed customers for decades. That's why 10 years ago, along with both Republican and Democratic members of this committee, we voted for the Family Smoking Prevention and Tobacco Control Act of 2009. This law restricted marketing tobacco products to children and banned most of the flavored cigarettes made to appeal to children. After that law passed, youth tobacco use declined. But the rise of e-cigarettes reversed that trend. For the first time in decades, the CDC reports that youth tobacco use is significantly rising. Because of e-cigarettes, 1.5 million more youth used a tobacco product in 2018 compared to the year before, 2017. High school e-cigarette users are 4 to 7 times more likely to start smoking traditional cigarettes than their non-vaping peers. Our work to end tobacco use and nicotine addiction in the United States is really at risk. We've been caught flat-footed by the popularity of e-cigarettes among young people. And now, in the midst of the youth e-cigarette epidemic, we're seeing an outbreak of a vaping-related illness with nearly 1,300 cases and 26 deaths. This illness is affecting children. 36% of the patients are under 20 years old. Just last month, the FDA acting commissioner told our oversight subcommittee that the FDA, quote, should have acted sooner, unquote, to rein in e-cigarettes. Despite the lessons from the Tobacco Control Act of 2009, we haven't extended its bipartisan restrictions to e-cigarettes. The bill we're considering today, Chairman Pallone and Representative Shalala, who is here with us this morning, right in the front row, former Secretary of HHS, now happily a member of the House of Representatives. She came very often to testify before this subcommittee. Her legislation fixes the problem I just described. The bill extends tobacco marketing, sale, flavor restrictions, and fees to e-cigarettes, while also making the landmark change of raising the minimum age to buy tobacco products to 21 years. This bill will save lives. Raising the tobacco age to 21 will result in 250,000 fewer premature deaths for those born between 2000 and 2019. It's comprehensive legislation that will reverse youth e-cigarette use and drive down youth tobacco use overall. We cannot allow young Americans to be ensnared in nicotine addiction. It's time to do everything we can to end youth tobacco use. I look forward to working with all of my colleagues on a bill to do just that. The chair now recognizes Dr. Burgess, the distinguished ranking member of the subcommittee, for his 5 minutes for an opening statement.
And I thank the chair, and I want to thank our witnesses for being with us this morning. I'll just note there have been over 1,000 confirmed and probable cases of lung injury reported to the Centers for Disease Control, reaching almost every state and U.S. territory. 80% of these cases involve individuals under the age of 35. Vaping and e-cigarettes acutely affect the youth population in the United States, which is why there has been such great national attention by the news media and indeed by the Congress. The CDC continues to work closely with state and local authorities to gather and to analyze the information from across the country. So both the Trump administration and Congress have taken steps to try to further understand and combat this lung injury outbreak. Action is needed, but we do need to first understand the issue at hand to devise the best solution. When it's an issue of public health at stake, it is critical that Congress work with the agencies, including the Food and Drug Administration and the CDC, to gather as much information as possible and act within appropriate authorities to protect the public. When this investigation began, the CDC issued a warning that consumers should avoid using any and all vaping products, including nicotine, THC, and hybrid products. Since the investigation has progressed, the CDC has perhaps refined their warning a bit to just avoid using these products, particularly those containing THC. Most affected patients reported a history of using THC-containing products, confirming the findings that the THC has played a role in the outbreak. As more information becomes known and understood about e-cigarettes, we should ensure that our legislative solutions tackle the true underlying cause of the issue. Throughout this conversation, we do have to keep in mind that the nicotine in e-cigarettes is still highly addictive. E-cigarettes do provide an alternative to traditional cigarettes for adult smokers who are trying to quit. Traditional cigarettes remain the leading cause of preventable death in the United States, claiming an estimated 480,000 lives or more each year. This is personal for me because both of my parents were part of that 480,000 statistic a few years ago. According to the CDC, an estimated 34 million adults in the United States currently smoke cigarettes, and more than 16 million Americans live with a smoking-related disease. I am certainly concerned about the effect of e-cigarettes on youth, but we do need to remember there is a large adult population with a whole host of health problems related to tobacco. This legislative hearing today is about Mr. Pallone's bill, H.R. 2339. The bill includes some policies similar to President Trump's executive order banning flavored e-cigarettes and some similarity to Senator McConnell's Tobacco-Free Youth Act that raises the minimum age for purchasing tobacco to age 21. While H.R. 2339 overlaps with some good policy coming from the administration and the Senate, there are provisions in the bill that are concerning should this become law. There is potential infringement on the First Amendment by requiring graphic health warnings on cigarette labels and advertising. There are other ways to educate individuals, particularly the youth population, of the harmful effects of smoking and reduce youth smoking rates without being detrimental to the freedom of speech. For example, Mr. McConnell's Tobacco-Free Youth Act, which has bipartisan support and in fact was included in a bipartisan package that passed out of the Health, Education, and Labor and Pensions Committee over in the Senate, S. 1895, and that's a bill that directly addresses youth smoking by raising the age to purchase without problematic and overreaching provisions. A bill such as 2339 includes some policies that may be helpful, but there are problematic provisions and lack a full understanding of the causes of this lung injury epidemic. Reducing youth tobacco rates is essential to a healthy America, so I'm certainly glad that we are having this discussion today. Again, thanks to all of our witnesses for being part of this important conversation this morning, and I look forward to hearing your testimony and the question portion of the hearing. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes Mr. Pallone, the chairman of the full committee, for his 5 minutes of an opening statement.
Thank you, Chairwoman Eshoo. This committee takes another important step in protecting our youth from a life of chronic disease, disability, and death from tobacco products and nicotine addiction. We'll consider H.R. 2339, the Reversing the Youth Tobacco Epidemic Act of 2019, which is a bipartisan bill that I introduced with Representative Donna Shalala aimed at reducing the number of kids using tobacco products in the United States. And I did want to mention, Congresswoman Shalala, when you, Madam Chair, when you said happily, I was thinking about that because it's true. She's always happy, and she's always substantive at the same time. It's a rare combination, and it's also rare that somebody's the secretary of a major agency and comes back to Congress. But I think it's that, you know, I was thinking about what Chairwoman Eshoo said, and I think that you're just very optimistic, and you always think that we can do things. And it's a day, you know, oftentimes she'll come to the floor and say, I have a new idea, and be all excited about it, which is such a great thing. So I just wanted to mention that. Let me say that 55 years ago, the Surgeon General warned of the dangerous health effects of smoking cigarettes, yet 5 decades later, smoking remains the leading cause of preventable death. The use of tobacco and nicotine has evolved since that first Surgeon General's report. A quick Google search will lead you to an array of products online, including cigarettes, cigars, smoking pipes, and the most recent addition, e-cigarettes. And these e-cigarettes are now available in many flavors, and studies show that flavor choices like mint, candy, fruit, or chocolate draw the interest of teens in middle school and high school. Unfortunately, while combustible cigarette use among teens has declined over the past 2 decades, there is a widespread and false perception that e-cigarettes are safe. And I have to say, I've been to some of my middle schools, and that's what I would get until recently from the students, that, oh, they're safe, there's not a problem here. And this false belief threatens the progress we've made in combating this public health threat. Compounding this alarming reality is the fact that nearly all tobacco use begins during youth and young adulthood, which is a crucial period for the development of the human brain. Recent data shows that over 3.6 million youth used e-cigarettes in 2018, making this product the most commonly used tobacco product on the market. Last month, our Oversight and Investigations Subcommittee held a hearing on the public health threats of e-cigarettes, and I remain deeply concerned about the outbreak of lung illnesses associated with e-cigarette use and vaping products. The most recent report from the CDC confirmed 26 deaths in 21 states, and at our oversight hearing, CDC stated that they expect the number of cases to increase by the hundreds. So I firmly believe that the youth vaping epidemic we face today could have been addressed if the FDA had moved forward with reviewing all e-cigarettes on the market when the agency first had the chance 2 years ago. And while I appreciate the administration's announcement to ban flavor vaping products, we have yet to see that promise come to fruition. 10 years ago, Congress took significant bipartisan action when we passed the Family Smoking Prevention and Tobacco Control Act, which gave the FDA regulatory authority to regulate tobacco products, and that was a strong step. But now, given the shocking increases in the number of teens and young people using e-cigarettes, our bill takes this authority a step forward. It extends FDA regulation on the sale and distribution of tobacco products, including e-cigarettes. The bill raises the minimum age for purchasing tobacco to 21 and makes it unlawful for any retailer to sell a tobacco product to any person younger than 21. And the bill also prohibits non-face-to-face sales of all tobacco products and bans all flavors of tobacco products, including mint and menthol. Now, this bipartisan bill has widespread support from groups like the African American Tobacco Control Leadership Council, American Academy of Pediatrics, American Cancer Society, American College of Cardiology, American Heart Association, the Lung Association, Thoracic Society, Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids, March of Dimes, and the National African American Tobacco Prevention Network. These groups say loud and clear, we're facing a serious problem that needs a comprehensive solution. And as the committee responsible for protecting the nation's public health, we have to act. It's my intention to advance this legislation this fall, and I hope we can do so with strong bipartisan support, because we simply can't lose another generation to a lifetime of nicotine addiction. And I want to thank the witnesses for being here today and look forward to our committee's discussion on this important bill, Madam Chair. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes Mr. Walden here.
In Mr. Walden's absence, may I ask unanimous consent that we recognize the gentleman from North Carolina?
So ordered. The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank the chairwoman. I appreciate the opportunity to speak today, and I share the concerns about youth initiating in nicotine products. But I want to make one thing clear. There's only one youth epidemic right now, and it's in e-cigarettes. I have serious concerns with the proposed legislation today and the intended and unintended consequences that could result from its enactment. My biggest concern is the total flavor ban for all tobacco products included in this legislation. While we've seen pronounced increases in youth initiation rates for e-cigarettes, we have not seen the same increases in traditional tobacco products such as combustible cigarettes and smokeless tobacco. In fact, these products have seen declining usage rates for the past 20 years according to the National Youth Tobacco Survey and the Monitoring the Future Survey. Now, looking at the larger issue of flavors as they relate to youth initiation, the Monitoring the Future Survey notes that youth are almost 4 times as likely to use illegal drugs and alcohol as they are to smoke cigarettes. The percentage is even lower for menthol cigarettes. Right now, you can buy alcohol in any number of flavors, including whipped cream, peach, mango, black cherry, and so forth. Alcohol is responsible for 4,300 deaths and 119,000 emergency room visits for people aged 12 to 21. Additionally, you can purchase marijuana-infused edibles, such as gummy bears, in any number of flavors appealing to children. Marijuana is a federally controlled substance and is being marketed to children, yet we're discussing banning legal products that have declining usage rates among youth. The Tobacco Control Act specifically provides the authority for the FDA to adopt additional product standards. Given the FDA already has the authority to ban menthol and other flavored products through a law that is now almost 10 years old, we should focus this hearing on the issue at hand, youth vaping, and how we can control and stem its occurrence. I agree this youth epidemic requires congressional attention, and I want to make sure our children are not initiating nicotine products that can lead to lifelong addictions. But let's make sure the tools already in statute are being used before we engage in knee-jerk reactions and add additional layers of statute on top. Thank you, and if anyone wants me to yield to them, I'm willing to do that. If not, Madam Chair, I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair reminds members that pursuant to committee rules, all members' written opening statements shall be made part of the record. I now would like to introduce our witnesses for today's hearing. First, Mr. Myers is the president of the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids. Thank you for being with us here today. Ms. Dorian Furman, she is the co-founder of Parents Against Vaping E-Cigarettes. Thank you for being with us. Dr. Tansky is the member of the American Academy of Pediatrics. Thank you to you for the testimony that you're going to provide. We have Dr. Gardner. He's the Senior Program Officer of Tobacco-Related Disease Research Program at the University of California. In my view, the greatest public university in the world. How's that? And last but not least, Dr. Michael Siegel. He's a professor, Department of Community Health Sciences at the Boston University School of Public Health. Thank you to you as well. So at this time, I'm going to recognize each witness for 5 minutes to provide your opening statement. I think you know what the, you need to have your microphones on, get close to them because we don't want to miss a word. It'll be green, then it'll turn yellow, and you know what red means. So with that, Mr. Myers, you have 5 minutes for your opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Eshoo, and Dr. Burgess, and members of the committee. We very much appreciate the opportunity to testify on H.R. 2339, the Reversing the Youth Tobacco Epidemic. My name is Matthew Myers. I'm the president of the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids. The campaign strongly supports this bill because we have a genuine crisis of youth e-cigarette use that is growing worse by the day. And this is the piece of legislation that addresses all of the leading drivers of youth tobacco use and tobacco-related health disparities. The use of sweet flavors, the use of marketing that appeals to kids, and easy access to tobacco products for our nation's children. Make no mistake, we do have a crisis. The use of e-cigarettes by our youth has skyrocketed. Newly released data shows that it has grown even worse over the last year. Today, roughly 27.5% of our high school students, an increase of 3 million in just the last 2 years, use e-cigarettes. It's also critical to understand that these kids are not just experimenting. More than a quarter of high school e-cigarette users are frequent users. That means they're using them more than 20 days a month, a clear sign of addiction. If you want a point of comparison, that is 3 to 5 times the number of e-cigarette users who use them with the frequency to demonstrate addiction than we see with kids, with cigarettes. For decades, we've been concerned about how rapid kids become addicted to cigarettes. E-cigarettes are an addiction that is more intense, more rapid, and is affecting more of our children than we have seen in 2 decades in the United States. There is also reason for additional concern. The evidence shows that kids who use e-cigarettes, non-smoking kids who use e-cigarettes, are far more likely to go on to become regular cigarette smokers. One study demonstrates that it increases the risk by 3 to 4 times. Put it in context, the kids who are using e-cigarettes are by and large not kids who are most at risk for cigarette smoking. So what we're not doing is we're not replacing kids who might have smoked with e-cigarettes. We're adding a whole generation of young people. The use of e-cigarettes by our kids has both short and long-term health consequences. The use of products that deliver massive doses of nicotine have a direct effect on the developing brain. They harm kids' memory loss, attention span, learning, the tales of kids who are dropping out of sports, who can't pay attention in the class, who are being who are so addicted that they have to go to inpatient therapy are legion. What we are facing is a crisis of addiction, and we don't know the long-term health effects of these products. Now, Dr. Burgess, you correctly said, and we're all concerned, about the need to do more to help adults quit. We're also concerned about not chasing false gods. The reality is that the scientific evidence about e-cigarette use and cessation is far weaker than it has been presented in most circumstances. Let me quote the prestigious medical journal, The Lancet, just this last week. Manufacturers of e-cigarettes and some public health advocates have supported their use as a smoking cessation tool and a safer alternative to cigarettes, something we would all support. The journal goes on to say, however, the evidence of both of these claims is weak. The positioning of e-cigarettes as a viable cessation aid is vastly overstated. Every public health authority in the United States that has examined the evidence has found that the evidence is too weak to conclude that these are effective tobacco cessation tools. Our adult smokers need effective tobacco cessation tools. They don't need to be misled. And we shouldn't be surprised. Let me quote a senior executive from Juul. Quote, "We don't think a lot about addiction here because we're not trying to design a cessation product at all," he said, later noting, "Anything about health is not on our mind." So we need to understand, we need to help adult smokers quit. We need the FDA to do more to assist them to identify products that will be effective to doing so. But we are not helping adults when we allow them to be misled by claims going on. At the heart of the industry, at the heart of the problem is, in fact, the use of flavors. Nearly 97% of current youth e-cigarette have used a flavored e-cigarette in the past month. 70% say they use them because of the flavors. The tales are legion. And make no mistake, mint and menthol are flavors that appeal to kids. We have seen the use of those.
Mr. Furman, your time is expired.
Sure. Let me just finish this sentence. We've seen the use of those two flavors go from 41% to 53% to 64% over the last 3 years. We need to address that issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now would like to recognize Ms. Furman for her 5 minutes of testimony. Welcome again.
I'm going to use this microphone, excuse me. Good morning, and thank you, Chairwoman Eshoo, Ranking Member Burgess, Chairman Pallone, and members of the Subcommittee on Health. My name is Dorian Furman, and I'm one of the co-founders of Parents Against Vaping E-Cigarettes, a national grassroots organization founded by 3 moms in response to the youth vaping epidemic, the worst adolescent public health crisis we have seen in decades. We founded PAVE in 2018, and today we have 13 chapters in 10 states. In late 2017, we became aware of a new trend called juuling. The real catalyst for us to form PAVE came in 2018 when Juul sent a representative into our son's 9th grade class for an addiction and mental health talk. We testified about this in July in the Congressional Oversight Subcommittee. After the talk, our boys went to speak with the presenter. When asked what to do if a friend was addicted to nicotine, the presenter pulled out his Juul, showed the boys how it worked, and called it the iPhone of vapes. We discovered that these predatory companies targeted our kids where they live, on social media with slick ads, influencers, and promotions. We were contacted by parents who discovered these companies advertising on homework websites. Yes, homework websites. We knew it was important to educate parents about the dangers of flavored e-cigarette products. We launched our website that fall and immediately began to get emails from parents around the country who were struggling with their kids' severe nicotine addiction. These kids were vaping in record numbers, and the physical and emotional effects of their nicotine addiction were stunning, and it was tearing families apart. The extreme explosive anger, the inability to concentrate and focus in school, the extreme anxiety and mood swings. We learned that nicotine rewires a developing adolescent brain, not only priming it for further addiction, but affecting cognitive development, mood, and impulse control. We learned that kids' lungs continue to develop until the age of 25, just like their brains. These unknown, unregulated, proprietary flavorings may be safe for consumption, but are not safe to be heated at high temperatures, combined with other chemicals and particles of metal, and inhaled deep into healthy developing lungs. And extremely high levels of a new patented nicotine salt, higher than any nicotine we have seen before, are absorbed so efficiently into a teen's blood and brain that the effects are immediate. And the addiction is immediate. Kids report vaping 24/7, and it's easy. Today's vapes leave no harsh smell and create very little smoke. Kids sleep with their Juul under their pillow or tape them to the nightstand so they can vape in the middle of the night and first thing when they wake up. Now kids have dozens of brands to choose from, each with their own multitude of proprietary flavors. Kids do not perceive harm in a product that is flavored like vanilla or cotton candy. Juul and other pod-based devices hide in plain sight on kids' desks. Now, new disposable brands like Stig are even smaller, with sweet, often mentholated flavors, and can easily be hidden in a child's small hand. These disposable plastic vapes, a new favorite among kids, are quickly replacing Juul. They can cost as little as $3 for a sweet vape with more nicotine than a pack of cigarettes. Kids can then easily dispose of the evidence. The emails from desperate parents and families continue to move us the most. They are desperately seeking resources, information, and treatment for their e-cigarette dependent nicotine-addicted kids. The truth is that currently there is no FDA-approved treatment for teen e-cigarette nicotine addiction. For instance, we got an email from Kelly Kennard of North Carolina, whose son Luca experienced seizures and had an addiction so severe he went to rehab for 39 days. There was a New York mom who wrote us when her 12-year-old was expelled from school for juuling. 12. There was Jerry Sullivan from Pennsylvania, whose only son was hospitalized for vaping-related illness and now cannot play football in his senior year of high school. There was the dad whose son is a D1 baseball player and the entire team was vaping. Now they use tobacco pouches, nicotine pouches, a new flavored product. Ruby Johnson's daughter Piper was hospitalized on her way to freshman year in college. Piper's out of the hospital and Ruby's joined PAVE. The mom who read about Ruby and brought her own daughter to the hospital after recognizing the symptoms now credits Ruby for saving her daughter's life. The list goes on. We get so many letters and it's hard to answer them all. And that friend who is addicted to nicotine, that was my 14-year-old son. I later found out that my son had been handed a mint Juul, a teen favorite, at the end of 8th grade by another 8th grader. It had become the new social norm. Suddenly, when kids met someone new, the first question was, "What's your flavor?" Not "What school do you go to?" or "What's your favorite sport?" Thankfully, my son was able to stop juuling with a lot of support. Every day, more scientific evidence emerges that vaping causes harm to the heart and lungs, the cardiovascular system, and now possibly cancer. And that means we're in a race against time to protect our kids from becoming not only an entire generation of nicotine addicts, but human guinea pigs for the vaping experiment overall. I'm here today representing PAVE and families around the country to support the legislation to reverse the youth tobacco epidemic and a full ban on flavored tobacco, which has been addicting our kids. The FDA banned flavored cigarettes in 2009 under the Family Smoking Prevention and Tobacco Act, except for menthol. And now we must ban all flavored tobacco products, including e-cigarettes and menthol cigarettes, to protect an entire generation of young Americans. The FDA themselves and the Surgeon General called this a youth vaping epidemic last year. The numbers are even higher today. Let's stop these numbers from rising together.
Thank you very much, Ms. Furman. Could the committee staff get the samples that Ms. Furman has so that all of the members can hold them in their hands, view them, and have a sense of what we're talking about here? I think that would be a good idea. There's the young man.
I did not bring a jewel because I assumed everyone knew what a jewel was. But, oh, and this might look like a highlighter. It's a vape. I've been holding it in my hand.
Thank you. I now would like to recognize Dr. Tansky and welcome her. You are recognized for 5 minutes for your testimony.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairwoman Eshoo, Ranking Member Burgess, Congresswoman Shalala, and members of the subcommittee. It's my pleasure to be here today to address the national youth tobacco epidemic, an urgent matter that requires Congress's prompt action. My name is Dr. Suzanne Tansky. I'm a practicing pediatrician and tobacco control expert with over 17 years of experience researching tobacco issues and counseling youth who use a wide range of tobacco products, including cigarettes, cigars, and e-cigarettes. I'm here today representing the American Academy of Pediatrics, a professional medical organization with over 67,000 pediatricians. The AAP strongly supports the Reversing the Youth Tobacco Epidemic Act. Pediatricians are on the front lines of counseling youth and young adults about the harms posed by tobacco products. Unfortunately, we call tobacco use a pediatric disease because virtually everybody started using before the age of 18. The latest data, as mentioned from the National Youth Tobacco Survey, shows that 27.5% of our high school students are current e-cigarette users. This shocking number is a 2.5-fold increase since 2017. As a pediatrician, I see all too often how nicotine addiction takes hold in my teenage patients who use e-cigarettes. Biologically, the brain is more susceptible to nicotine addiction during adolescence, and symptoms of dependence begin within days to weeks of occasional use and well before daily use. Nicotine dependence impacts reward pathways and areas of the brain that control executive function, memory, and mood. At low doses, it acts as a stimulant, leading to a feeling of pleasure and a reversal of unpleasant withdrawal symptoms such as irritability and anxiety. With repeated exposure, tolerance develops quickly and leads to needing more nicotine to even just feel normal. Importantly, for many young people, this is not sporadic use, but it is consistent, frequent, and dependent use. Recently, a colleague asked me if I'd heard of teens getting up in the middle of the night. I said I hadn't. This is a sign of intense nicotine addiction. But I quickly realized that it's just because I wasn't asking the right question. And repeatedly since then, in speaking with my patients, they admit they are indeed vaping throughout the night. This is something I've not seen with adolescent cigarette users. The teens I see in my practice and in my community are using a variety of e-cigarette devices, but most often Juul and the small devices like you see here today, small and discreet. One Juul pod contains the nicotine content as an entire pack of cigarettes. I have adolescents reporting using a pod or more a day. These pods lack any cues for how much has been used, meaning adolescents have no idea how much nicotine they're getting. With high levels of nicotine delivery, our adolescents simply don't have a chance. What's more, studies to date have shown that previously never smoking e-cigarette users are 3 times more likely to progress to smoking initiation with cigarettes. Beyond nicotine addiction, as mentioned, there's serious concerns about vaping and lung health. As of last week, there have been about 1,300 cases of vaping-associated lung injury, with 36% of those cases occurring in kids under the age of 21. 26 deaths have been reported, with the youngest being 17 years old. This outbreak has called attention to the acute dangers of e-cigarette aerosol inhalation. And while some have been quick to explain that this is only due to vaping THC, which is the psychoactive ingredient in marijuana, this has not yet been determined, and the CDC reports nicotine use in almost 60% of cases and exclusive nicotine in 13%. In light of these health concerns, it is critical to limit the appeal and access of these products to youth. The Reversing the Youth Tobacco Epidemic Act will institute a prohibition on all flavored tobacco products, including e-cigarettes, menthol cigarettes, and flavored cigars. This is the single most important policy that Congress can pass to address the youth tobacco epidemic, and a step that Congress took years ago for other flavored cigarettes. The body of evidence is clear. Flavors in tobacco products attract young users and hook kids. The flavors help mask the harsh taste of nicotine, making repeated use more likely, and thereby increasing the likelihood of developing addiction. It's important to include menthol, as this is well known to promote and sustain tobacco use. People are more addicted and sicker because of menthol in tobacco. This legislation will also raise the tobacco sales to age 21, a key policy that successfully reduces teen access to tobacco products. This works in part by getting tobacco products out of high schools, cutting off a social pipeline. The bill also importantly prohibits tobacco sales online, another source of youth access, and it holds e-cigarettes to the same marketing restrictions as traditional cigarettes, preventing the use of tried and true tobacco company marketing tactics aimed at youth that have been designed to mislead the public about tobacco. We've made significant progress over the years in reducing adolescent tobacco use through reduced cigarette smoking, but that progress has been jeopardized by a tobacco industry that is constantly innovating in the business of addicting young people. The Reversing the Youth Tobacco Epidemic Act will help prevent youth from starting tobacco in the first place, and we urge Congress to quickly advance this very important legislation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Tansky. I now would like to recognize Dr. Gardner for your 5 minutes for testimony, and welcome again.
Thank you, and thank you for having me here this morning. I'm Dr. Philip Gardner. I work at the University of California Office of the President Tobacco-Related Disease Research Program, and have worked there for 23 years. I'm also the co-chair of the African American Tobacco Control Leadership Council, from which I'm speaking here today. Let me just read my opening paragraph statement that I sent to the committee earlier. The African American Tobacco Control Leadership Council strongly encourages the Subcommittee on Health of the Energy and Commerce Committee to adopt Representatives Pallone and Shalala's bill, Reversing the Youth Epidemic Act of 2009, H.R. 2339. From our reading, this bill is the most comprehensive tobacco legislation proposed in years. Excuse me. Especially because it would prohibit the manufacture of menthol and all characterizing flavors in tobacco products, including e-juices. Support for the bill now is extremely important given the vaping lung injury crisis that is sweeping our nation today. But also this bill would finally get menthol flavorings out of cigarettes, little cigars, and all other tobacco products, something the FDA has failed to do for the past 10 years. The predatory marketing of these products must be stopped, and we all should recognize that this as a social injustice issue, an issue that disproportionately impacts poorer communities, marginalized groups, youth, and communities of color. Be appraised that 85% of African American adults and 94% of black youth who smoke are using menthol products. These striking statistics come from the predatory marketing of these products. There are more advertising for menthol cigarettes in the African American community. There are more lucrative promotions for these products. And I guess what pisses me off the most, these products are cheaper. We have national-wide data as it relates to that. So let's just take a look at this for a minute. I would suggest to you that menthol is the ultimate candy flavor. It helps the poison to go down easier. Menthol masks the harsh taste of smoking. It activates cold receptors in the lungs and in the bronchi. It activates taste buds. It produces an anesthetic effect that allows easier and deeper inhalation. The deeper you inhale, the more toxins and nicotine you intake. The more nicotine and toxins you intake, the more addicted you become. The more addicted you become, the harder it is to quit. Menthol also inhibits metabolism of nicotine. It slows it down, essentially, allowing for nicotine to stay in the body longer. It activates more nicotinic receptors, and not to get too technical, it produces more dopamine expression in the body, meaning they're more pleasurable. You like them more. It's why it's harder to quit. In chewing tobacco, if you have menthol in it, it crosses the gum barrier much more effectively than if it isn't in there. And last but certainly not least, menthol in cigarettes increases the ability of smoke to penetrate cell membranes much more effectively. Some have argued that this is discriminatory since black people use menthol cigarettes more, and we should protect their product. However, I'd suggest to you it's just the opposite. It's the discriminatory practices of the tobacco industry that led to the disproportionate use of these products by folks. Look at it this way. In 1952, only 5% of blacks used menthol cigarettes. By 1968, it almost tripled to 14%. By 1976, it had tripled again to over 44%. And by 2000, we're into the 80% with this thing. Other people would also like to suggest to you that if you were to ban this product, this will lead to the criminalization of young black youth. I've worked on this subject for the last 10 years. We've gotten bills passed in 26 cities that restrict the sale of menthol overall. No one's been arrested. This bill is not about possession. It's about, in the Pallone bill, is about manufacturing, but at the local level it's been about sale. Let me tell you, we should strike while the iron is hot. 6 states have already outlawed these flavors in some form or another. I, of one, don't want to wait on the FDA to act or wait on the Trump administration to act. Let's have the Congress act. Let's have somebody act on this. I would suggest to you that the most fundamental health thing that could go down, and my colleagues have all pointed out, it's the #1 killer in the United States. Let's take some action on it. Let's get flavors out of cigarettes. Let's get flavors out of e-juices. Let's protect our youth. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Gardner, for all the years that you have given of your life to this subject matter. And the chair would now like to recognize Dr. Siegel. You have 5 minutes for your testimony. Thank you again for being here today.
Thank you, Chairwoman Eshoo, and members of the subcommittee. My message today is simple. H.R. 2339 has the potential to help curtail the youth vaping epidemic. But first, you must eliminate one subsection that, if enacted, will have severe negative public health consequences. Subsection D of Section 103, which bans flavored electronic cigarettes, will result in a public health disaster. As you know, we are in the midst of an outbreak of severe acute respiratory disease that has affected more than 1,000 people and has resulted in more than 20 deaths. Can we prevent these tragic deaths by banning the retail sale of vaping products? The answer is no. In the vast majority of cases, the victims were not purchasing vaping products from retail stores. Instead, they were obtaining vape cartridges from the completely unregulated black market. These products originate from illegal drug operations that are producing tens of thousands of contaminated THC, not nicotine vape cartridges. So in a sense, the cause of this outbreak is not the fact that youth are buying vaping products from stores, but the fact that they are not buying their vaping products from stores. The lesson that this outbreak should teach us is that the greatest danger to our youth is not store-bought vaping products, but those purchased from friends, on the street, or over the internet from the black market. A ban on flavored e-cigarettes would create a public health disaster because it would create a new black market for flavored e-liquids. It is nearly certain that we would see more outbreaks similar to what we're experiencing now with these tainted THC vape cartridges. Banning flavored e-liquids is not going to do anything to curtail this respiratory disease outbreak, but it may make the outbreak worse. Why? Because the supply of e-liquids that youth are vaping is going to transition from one dominated by nicotine products to one dominated by THC products, exactly the products that are causing this outbreak. There's a second reason why banning e-liquid flavors would have devastating health consequences. More than 2 million adult smokers in the U.S. have quit smoking completely by switching to flavored electronic cigarettes. If these products are banned, many of these ex-smokers will return to cigarette smoking. Most of those who don't will turn to a new, potentially dangerous black market that will be created by this legislation. I want to suggest to you today that the way to address the problem of youth e-cigarette use is not to ban these products, but to strictly regulate them. And second, that we must focus on the aspect of e-cigarettes that is actually causing harm to our youth. The real danger of youth e-cigarette use is not the flavors. It's not the flavors that are causing the harm. It's the high levels of nicotine and the special nicotine formulations being used in some of these products that are resulting in youth addiction to vaping. For example, prior to the introduction of Juul, 3/4 of non-smoking youth vapors reported using e-cigarettes no more than once a week, and only 4% used them every day. But by 2018, 12% of non-smoking youth used e-cigarettes every day, a tripling of the percentage of youth e-cigarette users who were addicted, and less than half of non-smoking youth vapors use e-cigarettes less than once a week. This change is what has created a public health crisis. So what explains this change? What changed is that products like Juul, Soren, Smock, and Fix entered the market and quickly became popular among teenagers. All of these brands use a different nicotine formulation from virtually all other e-cigarettes. They use a nicotine salt at very high concentrations. The use of nicotine salts allows nicotine to be absorbed into the bloodstream much more quickly, simulating the pattern that you get with a real cigarette. That is why so many youth are now addicted to vaping. It's not the flavors, it's the nicotine. Regulating the nicotine formulations and levels allowable in e-liquids is the single most effective step you can take to help reverse the youth e-cigarette epidemic. In summary, the broad stroke of prohibition is going to make this crisis worse, not better. Instead of regulating e-cigarette flavors, I recommend that you regulate the nicotine content in e-cigarettes. This will allow you to balance the need to reverse the epidemic of youth vaping and the need to keep flavored e-cigarettes available to adults who have quit smoking or are trying to quit smoking. The art of public health and public policy is being able to balance competing objectives. I think we can do that in a way that protects the health of both youth and adults. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Siegel. We've concluded opening statements. We're now going to move to members' questions. Each member will have 5 minutes to ask questions of our witnesses, and I will start by recognizing myself for 5 minutes. Do each of our witnesses support raising the minimum tobacco age to 21? Everyone agree?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Okay, terrific. Do you support extending the current restrictions on sales and advertising of traditional cigarettes to e-cigarettes?
Yes.
Yes.
Everyone, good. Do you support prohibiting non-face-to-face sales of tobacco products so that children can't buy tobacco products online?
Yes.
Everyone agrees? Wonderful. All right, so we obviously are in agreement about major portions of the bill we're considering today. Now I want to talk about the provision that bans flavors. I was going to start with Mr. Myers, but I want to go to Dr. Siegel. What kind of candy do you like? What's your favorite candy?
Bubble gum.
Bubble gum. And you like the flavor of bubble gum.
I do.
Right? Yeah. So I think that if you take the attraction to the flavor, that's your gum of choice. You're attracted to it because of the flavor. Now that I would draw a parallel from that to, and I disagree with what you said in your testimony that flavor doesn't have anything to do with anything. Well, you know, I love Italian food, so I go to Italian restaurants. Flavor is very attractive. It really drives our eating habits and other habits. So I just want to get that on the record. Mr. Myers, do you know whether e-cigarettes' sweet flavors have contributed to youth tobacco use?
All of the evidence is that they're the driving force of that, and that it has gotten worse over the last 4 years.
And do you know whether e-cigarettes' sweet flavors have contributed to adults quitting tobacco use?
Well, what's extraordinary, and I have a chart I'd be happy to provide the committee, that over the last 4 years, we've seen this meteoric rise in youth use of these sweet flavors. The percentage of adults who have used e-cigarettes during the time the flavors have been so prominent hasn't increased at all. It's hovered straight about 3% and not gone up. So what it shows is that the introduction of all these flavors has fueled a youth epidemic, but it has had no impact whatsoever. Indeed, before Juul was introduced, the most popular e-cigarette flavor was tobacco. So for smokers who want to quit, that was a viable option until
That's
Juul
interesting.
changed the market.
Thank you. Dr. Tansky, you spoke about the large amount of nicotine that e-cigarettes deliver. And thank you for, Ms. Furman, for the samples, because I noted on the various packages the percentage of nicotine that they contain. A single e-cigarette pod, this is really stunning, can have as much nicotine as a pack of cigarettes. And as you said, some young people report smoking more than one pod a day. Should we consider legislation to restrict the amount of nicotine in a pod?
That's actually a little bit of a complicated question. As Dr. Siegel was mentioning, the technology really changed with the addition of nicotine salts to the industry, and there were differences in pH that were introduced by that. And every pod is also a different size. So these are, you have a disposable one here, but there's some that Dr. Siegel was also mentioning where the pod size is 3 milliliters rather than just 0.7 or 1 milliliter. So there's a lot more quantity that can go in there. So this is a fairly complicated chemistry equation as well, because depending on the voltage of the device, it also changes delivery. So someone who's using one of those big mod devices, they can use a very low
I
nicotine.
understand the complication.
Yeah.
But we deal with complex things
Right, so
here.
let me finish my thought,
Yeah.
so it'll show why.
Well,
a
I only have
number of-
56 seconds left, so.
Okay, sorry. So the amount of nicotine in it is insufficient because the voltage can change delivery. So you can have a 1% nicotine solution in a high voltage device that will.
Do you think we should look for a way to restrict the amount of nicotine in a pod? Yes or no?
FDA needs to look at the science
Okay,
though, because we
thank you.
can't just say a number because it'll
I
be a
understand, I
knee-jerk
understand.
reaction.
How can we require e-cigarettes to better warn people about the amount of nicotine they're ingesting?
A warning label will go a long way and making it very clear what the numbers mean. The numbers are very confusing on the packaging. Some people don't know what 5%
I think it should
means.
state it's equal to one
Yes.
pack of cigarettes,
And it-
equal to 2 packs of cigarettes. That's pretty clear.
Exactly. I think the other piece, it has to be as delivered as opposed to what's the content, because there's a difference between what's delivered and the content that's in the device. And again, that's complicated nuance, but it really is critically important because, again, our young people have no idea how much nicotine they're getting when they use
Thank
these
you.
devices.
My time has expired.
Sorry.
Thank you to each one of you. The chair now recognizes Dr. Burgess, the ranking member of our subcommittee, for his 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you. And this is fascinating about regulating the amount of nicotine in these devices. I actually remember in 2008 or 9 when we did the Tobacco Control Act, and for reasons I did not understand, written into statute was a prohibition that the FDA could not require a 0 milligram cigarette to be produced. And I thought that was odd, and I thought that was wrong, so I had an amendment that the FDA could require a 0 milligram cigarette to be produced. I actually lost that battle. That language, I think, endures to this day. But to Dr. Siegel's point, I mean, the nicotine is the culprit here. People may like the flavor of bubble gum or dark chocolate, but it is the nicotine that keeps you coming back, and it is the nicotine that you cannot live without. If someone said, well, you can't have your bubble gum today, the world would not come to an end. But if someone says, someone who is heavily nicotine addicted, deprivation of nicotine actually incites a fairly significant physiological and psychological response. And it is unpleasant enough that people will do, just like with other addicting substances, people will do whatever is required to the exclusion of everything else to fulfill that need. And I'm not a psychologist, but I think that's kind of the definition of addiction. I don't like to use that because people can apply it to coffee, which I don't think we should outlaw. But this is an area where, and Dr. Gardner, I appreciate your call to action and your enthusiasm with that call to action, but the way our system is set up, we can legislate, and we do legislate all the time, but we do require the administration, we do require the federal agencies for the implementation of that, and indeed one of the perhaps the failings of the Tobacco Control Act was the fact that this committee has not had many oversight or implementation hearings on that activity, and I think we heard the acting FDA director kind of admit that they've fallen behind the curve, and maybe had Congress exercised its oversight authority in that regard a little more stringently, perhaps we wouldn't be at this place. But Dr. Siegel, we saw the devices that Ms. Furman supplied to us, but your contention is, or Dr. Tansky, I guess your contention is, that it wouldn't matter, the 6%, 5%, 2% devices mandating that level because of the differences in bioavailability of different nicotine salts, and delivery devices alters what a person actually absorbs?
So the nicotine salt formulation that Juul introduced, and which has now been copied by several companies, essentially the nicotine is absorbed much more rapidly into the body. And that's what creates the addiction. That's why kids are addicted to Juul. It's not just the amount, it's the formulation. And the cigarette companies have perfected this method of getting nicotine into the blood. So I think that what I think needs to be done is to have a certain nicotine level that's allowable for all e-cigarettes, and then a lower nicotine level that would be the maximum for nicotine salt formulations. I think a 20 milligram per milliliter limit for electronic cigarettes would be very reasonable, and I would make it half of that for nicotine salt formulations. It's important to recognize that in the UK, they do have a level. They have a 20 milligram per milliliter level, and that's the maximum. They have Juul there, but Juul comes in at 17 milligrams per milliliter in the UK, not 50 like they do in the US. So I think regulating that at a level of 20 would help to solve this problem of youth addiction.
And what about, as Dr. Tansky pointed out, creating some, like with opiates, we have milligrams of morphine equivalents, the MME that's become so famous. Is there any way to apply that to the nicotine delivery devices?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, as Dr. Tansky mentioned, if we require companies to reveal the nicotine delivery of the product, that will inform the user of exactly what they're getting. And I think it's easily possible to do that.
Well, again, fascinating topic, and you've given us a lot of additional information. We do have to get this right, and over and above everything else. So I thank you for your testimony today. I'll yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes Mr. Pallone here. Mr. Butterfield, the gentleman from North Carolina, for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to the 5 witnesses for your testimony today. I've stayed throughout the hearing because I wanted to hear from each one of you, because this issue is very important to me. As many of my colleagues know, I represent a tobacco district. At one time, it was the largest tobacco district in the United States of America. I think we may have slipped to number 2 or 3 now, but we are a tobacco-producing district. And so whenever I hear the word tobacco, my ears perk up, just as those from New York. When you hear financial, your ears may perk up. When you hear sugar, then you pay extra attention if you're from a sugar district. And so that's where I'm coming from today. My phone has been ringing for the last few days. Some have even asked me, does Congress have a legitimate interest in regulating these products? And my position is, and I've said it to anyone who's willing to listen, we do have a legitimate interest as Congress in addressing public health concerns and the recent spike in the use of electronic cigarettes. No one in this room, I would hope, disagrees that a youth vaping epidemic is underway. We need to address it. And so I thank the chairman for meeting this epidemic head on and wholeheartedly support his efforts to stem youth vaping. However, I have very real concerns with the unintended consequences that could result if this bill were to become law. We all know that nicotine is harmful. We have heard that throughout the hearing. It's harmful to young people and can have a lasting impact on their developing brains. The CDC reports that there's evidence to indicate that flavoring such as fruit and candy and e-cigarette products can make them more appealing to youth. And in fact, they are the primary reason that youth report using e-cigarettes. Flavors such as these are already banned in cigarettes. I was on this committee when we enable and authorize that. They're already banned, but these types of flavors are not currently prohibited in e-cigarettes. The bill before us seeks to address the disturbing youth vaping trend in 2 ways. First, the bill raises the age to 21, and we all agree with that. I am 100% supportive of raising the age. The second monumental shift in the bill is a ban on characterizing flavors, including menthol, for all tobacco products. While a ban on flavors of e-cigarettes that appeal to youth may be an appropriate public policy response to vaping, I am concerned that extending that ban to existing tobacco products on the market, such as menthol, and flavored smokeless tobacco and cigars could have unintended consequences. Menthol cigarettes constitute 1/3 of the U.S. market. In the African American community, the preferred cigarette is menthol. 80% of African Americans who smoke prefer to use menthol cigarettes. In other communities, the preferred cigarette is non-menthol. So I want us to think about that, my colleagues. Think about that. This bill does not address tobacco use in 2/3 of the U.S. market. Instead, it targets 1/3 of the market that just happens to be African American. The fact is that banning menthol cigarettes will lead to users migrating to non-menthol cigarettes. It will not lead to cessation of using tobacco products. So, a flavor ban on existing tobacco products does not solve the problem that we all agree needs to be addressed. Instead, this bill makes the manufacture of menthol tobacco products illegal, retains legal status for non-menthol. My fear, shared by the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives and Law Enforcement Action Partnership, is that such a ban will inevitably lead to the creation of a black market for mentholated products. According to these groups, there is already an illicit market for cigarettes, and a ban on menthol could encourage more criminal activity as groups look to bring in mentholated cigarettes from outside of the country or make them on their own. In conclusion, my colleagues, if we really want to address tobacco cessation, someone just put a bill on the table that will ban the manufacture, sale, and use of tobacco, period. If you want to stop the use of tobacco, let's present a bill that will prohibit the manufacture and use of tobacco. It is naive to think that a prohibition of flavors for existing tobacco products like menthol will not have unintended consequences. I urge my colleagues to think about these things and to realize that you are targeting a specific community at the exclusion of another community. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. It's a pleasure to recognize the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Shimkus, for his 5 minutes of questions.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chairman, took me by surprise. I thought Mr. Upton was going to be before me, but let me just go to a couple of questions. And we've had these debates before, but not in this venue of e-cigarettes. So this is, I think, for those of us who have been able to stay, we got 2 hearings going on at the same time. The interesting one down below on the first floor is the telecommunications and whatever the other committee is. And it's unimportant because I'm not on it. But technology, whatever it is. Whatever. And you're wasting my time, Madam Chairman. So, but the point is that what we're trying to address in the e-commerce world is, do the providers and the stewards of that information, do they have some legal authority to police that? And it was interesting, in one of the court cases, 2 people were brought to court. The one that tried to police lost the case. The one that allowed free information did not lose the case. So this kind of goes to Dr. Siegel and some of the comments made on black market issues that we have to really be concerned about, and also regulation. The deaths that we have seen I've been told, and what I've read, is that they're black market pods that had THC and oils like vitamin E. And I think most people, even though I'm not, Dr. Bouchon's a cardiothoracic surgeon. I hope I'm here to listen to his questions if he gets a chance to do that. I mean, you can't put oil in your lungs. That's because if you just know anything about lungs and how they operate, you just can't coat them with oil, because that's why people end up dying. Dr. Siegel, Congressman Butterfield raised this issue, and we were here for this last debate on menthol. And Dr. Gardner, it's kind of interesting because your testimony identifies we're targeting the African community by allowing this, but my colleague would say we're targeting the community by if we attack menthol aspect. So there's this, this is the same debate we had years. Is it tar that creates the buildup of tar in the lungs that creates either lung disease in a regular smoker and cancer? Can anyone answer that question? I think the answer is yeah. The buildup of tar. We used to hear tar and nicotine, right? So an e-cigarette takes away the tar out of this equation. And I would propose that as we move forward, we look at FDA's involvement in proper regulation of what is a healthy application of this, because I do think there's a credible argument about those who are in minority communities who are smoking menthol cigarettes, who now are trying to move to e-cigarettes to decrease their risk of cancer, right? If it's a readily regulated in ways delivered, that should not be discounted. Does anyone disagree with that? Go ahead. Yes, sir.
Just a couple facts I think are really important to understand here. First of all, delivering of nicotine, particularly to adolescent brain, is itself harmful.
Yeah, I know, but we've talked about first about age. I'm not talking about just doing the age. I'm talking about the issue of cigarettes and e-cigarettes and cancer and tar.
So a couple of things are important. We don't know the long-term health effects of e-cigarettes because they haven't been studied and they haven't been regulated.
And that's why we have Food and Drug Administration that properly vets the science and makes regulations on the safety and efficacy of products.
But it's also a reason we should be concerned about the youth epidemic. And what we have seen is that while the nicotine keeps them coming back, it's the flavors that get them in the first place.
But if you regulate the nicotine at a level, and I understand the chairman's point about flavors are important, but Dr. Siegel, your point was it's the nicotine and the addiction that keeps them coming back, not the flavor. Is that correct?
Exactly.
But
Exactly
in the interim, what we have is we have 1.5 million new kids each year.
So we should regulate
the
I think it's the answer is the FDA if we want to help people save themselves from cancer, transition, and to deal with the pods. Thank you, Madam Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I'm pleased to recognize the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Sarbanes, for his 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks to the panel. I'm proud to be a co-sponsor of the bill that we're talking about today. I'm mostly just terribly confused by this conversation because I remember this gigantic tobacco settlement that we had a few years ago, and I remember aspects of it being how to limit marketing to young people in all different kinds of ways. And it just seems like the industry has found this gigantic loophole for going back and creating that whole public health crisis all over again. And I'd be interested in hearing again some of these statistics, because I think I'm understanding that the pace at which young people, middle school age, high school age, maybe younger if you want to describe that, the pace at which they are, the uptake of the e-cigarettes may be like nothing we've ever seen when you look at the period of time and the numbers that we're talking about. And if that is what begins the addiction to nicotine that then leads to use of the product over time, then we're kind of right back where we were 15 years ago on this. It's staring us in the face. It's bearing down on us. So could you describe the statistics that way in terms of whoever is in the best position to do it, and maybe compare it, historically to other periods when there was a significant acceleration in use among youth of tobacco products, and comment on how it's new and different and scary.
Well, let me defer to Dr. Tansky, but the increase in e-cigarette use between 2017 and 2018 is the single largest increase in use of any substance that has been studied in the last 43 years. So when you say that it's unprecedented, it is genuinely unprecedented. And what's more frightening is that between 2018 and 2019, the absolute numbers of new kids using these products grew by the exact same number. We haven't seen an epidemic come on us this quickly, this intensely, at any point in the last 50 years. Let me refer to Dr. Tansky.
Yes, I completely agree. This is indeed unprecedented. In 2017, it was 11.7% of our high school kids were using e-cigarettes in the last month, and now it's 27.5%, and that's just exponential. And if you look back and you look at kind of the rates of cigarette rising year over year, cigarettes never did this quickly. So this really is uncharted territory. And to your point about marketing, you're right. Marketing really influences kids, and there is implicit marketing and explicit marketing. And sometimes what the packaging says or what the ad says, the kids read it in a very different way. And there's topics of freedom, and there's this image of healthiness, and kids respond to that. And we know that marketing works, and that's why marketing was restricted so profoundly with all the previous acts that we've had around other tobacco products.
Could you speak to whether there's any effective counter marketing, or I'd call it education, going on in schools that is equipping young people to resist this temptation? What are some programs you've seen or education efforts that you consider to be particularly effective, even if right now they're not really competing that well with what's coming from the other direction?
That's a great question. The FDA actually has a very strong program that is in the schools. They actually have posters in the bathrooms that say people actually use the bathroom here too, trying to counteract the idea that now the restrooms in some of the high schools and middle schools are used that's where people go to vape. So they're really trying to get in where the kids are and directly counter market, if you will. The Truth Initiative also has some excellent counter marketing where they're really trying to work with the kids. They've done testing on the messages to make sure that they're actually being received the right way. So we're trying, but the issue is that the overwhelming pressure that the kids are getting from either marketing that is explicitly from these industries or that's social marketing and social media related, it's very difficult to break through that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The gentleman yields back. I now would like to recognize the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Griffith, for his 5 minutes questions.
Thank you all very much for being here today. The e-cigarette problem is a significant problem that we have to deal with. And, it always amazes me how people can do things that ought to just, your instincts ought to tell you there's something wrong with them. I know the history books when I was growing up had lots to be desired, but one of the stories that they told in our Virginia history books was that the first person or one of the first people who was smoking a cigar on the streets of London, somebody ran into the store, grabbed the bucket that was there for fire and put it in their face because clearly there was smoke coming out of them. They were on fire and that couldn't be healthy. I don't know why we don't realize that. So I recognize that. And my wife is a juvenile judge, and she is constantly talking about all the problems they're having in the schools because they are so small, Ms. Furman. The devices are so small. The kids can take them to school. It's not like a cigarette where you immediately smell the smoke and you can see, generally where it's coming from or if there's people in the bathroom smoke. No, it leaves no telltale sign, and they can actually do it in the classroom while the teacher is trying to teach. And so it is a significant problem, and we need to do something. The question is this the bill? Now, I don't have a problem with raising the age to 21. But then we get into these other issues. And to me, and I'm not trying to chastise you all, I think the American public have to suddenly realize we have some kind of split personality thing going on. Because, as my colleague said in his opening statement from North Carolina, you can get gummy bears with marijuana in them. You can get brownies with marijuana. A staffer brought me cannabis-infused honey sticks. And it says, anyone from small children with severe seizures to old men with Alzheimer's disease can benefit from taking marijuana or CBD supplements. And we do have a physical store in the U.S., but if you want us to ship to you, we're happy to do so. Now, my problem is I've always been for medicinal use of marijuana since the 90s. I think that makes sense. I don't know why we haven't been studying it more. But Mr. Myers, you said in relationship to e-cigarettes, we don't know what the long-term effects are. But the American public is demanding that we make recreational marijuana legal. It's been illegal for decades. And while I support medicinal marijuana, I've never been convinced on recreational, and part of it is exactly what you said. I don't know what the long-term effects are on the public. So I'm going to ask you all, not because I'm trying to make any huge point other than we have to sort this out as a society. Laws don't solve all the problems, but do any of you all support recreational use of marijuana being legalized in the United States? Mr. Myers.
Let me not avoid your question, but say we have a lot of problems in this country. There's some we do know how to solve, and this is one we can solve, so that there are clear pathways to deal with the increased use of nicotine
And I don't
by
disagree.
kids.
There are things we can do. I don't disagree with that.
And
but I'm
and
trying
we
to find
shouldn't-
out.
we sh-
And I don't think you all. I was expecting a quick answer on this. I don't think you all have that split personality that the public has. I think because of the long-term risks that are unknown, and because particularly on smoking anything, whether it's tobacco or marijuana, it's got to be harmful, particularly on those young brains. And when you're talking about eliminating flavored cigarettes, then should we not be looking at eliminating in those states that say it's legal, notwithstanding the fact it's still illegal federally, brownies and honey sticks? What say you, Mr. Myers?
There is a broader question, but our issue focuses on there's something we could do about this issue now, and there's a solution to it.
My problem is I see them as being similar issues, and I'm with you on one, but if you're for smoking recreational marijuana, I'm not sure I'm with you until we know the results. Ms. Furman, what say you?
Well, I would say that eating a brownie and vaping a strawberry THC pod are very different. So yes, I do not believe in legalizing recreational marijuana, especially when it's in a vape, which obviously attracts kids, and the flavors. A lot of these THC vapes are also flavored.
I understand that. Yes, ma'am, absolutely. Doctor?
Smoking anything is likely to shorten your life, period.
Yes, ma'am. Burning material in your lungs is not a good thing, in my opinion. Dr.
Yes.
Gardner?
Let me suggest to you that you can, in California, marijuana has been legalized. I'm sorry. Marijuana has been legalized in California. I think what would be great at the national level is the decriminalization of it, such that you aren't going around arresting people for this. Smoking anything is bad for you. There's a period after that. How you legalize it, it didn't have to get legalized where you have billboards all over California like you have. It could have been legalized another way. I would suggest at the federal level, there's a way to do both things. Legalize it, decriminalize it, not promote it. I need to say this. We had a conference 4 years ago on the at UCSF, University of California, San Francisco, on the legalization of this. We came out with two conclusions. One conclusion is that it should be decriminalized. The second conclusion is it should be denormalized.
I know I'm out of time, Madam Chairman. Dr. Siegel, answer quickly.
Sure. I think you're making a great point. I think that flavored alcoholic beverages are causing major havoc among youth. We know that it's a gateway to liquor use. It's causing tens of thousands of deaths. We know that flavored THC products are causing this outbreak, but nobody has called for a ban on flavored alcoholic beverages. Nobody has called for cracking down on flavored
And my
THC.
time is up, so I'm going to have to yield back. Thank you, Madam Chair.
A gentleman yields back. It's a pleasure to recognize the gentleman from New York, Mr. Engel, for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In my home state of New York, there's been a 160% increase in the number of teens using e-cigarettes between 2014 and 2018. Many of these children use e-cigarettes in schools, and I've even heard from schools in my district that they're installing vape detectors in their bathrooms to catch students vaping. Teachers, principals, and school administrators have been thrust to the forefront of this epidemic, but schools unfortunately, are not equipped to handle these types of public health cases. To that end, I've introduced the bipartisan bicameral Smoke-Free Schools Act, which would ban vaping in schools and child care facilities. Schools should be places that promote healthy childhood development, but tobacco use jeopardizes their health. Dr. Tansky, I want to ask you, could you please describe how tobacco use hinders a child's brain development and how it can impact a child's ability to succeed in the classroom?
Thank you for the question. So as I mentioned in my testimony, we know that the adolescent brain is really quite uniquely susceptible to nicotine addiction. And if you think very simplistically, things kind of develop from the back to the front, and one of the final things that develops is our executive function and our ability to put our brakes on our own behavior. The pleasure center lights up first. So we know what feels good, and so that's why the adolescent brain is more likely to be addicted. We know it feels good, they try it, it feels good, and they don't have the brakes to stop their own behavior. So addiction is very prevalent in adolescents and in younger people, and we know that it impacts on their executive function. We know that nicotine can impair the way people kind of process and prioritize things. So indeed, it can make a big difference on school success. So someone who is struggling with either nicotine addiction or withdrawal. So if someone is withdrawing from nicotine during the classroom because they can't vape in the school, or because they don't have a vape, or they put good restrictions on, they're distracted, they're irritable, they're anxious, they don't feel good. And so that also is going to impair their ability to be successful in a classroom.
Thank you very much. The science is settled that nicotine certainly has short-term and long-term health consequences for children. And it's my understanding that many e-cigarettes on the market today are much more efficient at delivering nicotine than traditional cigarettes, delivering nicotine at substantially higher levels and making these e-cigarettes potently addictive. In some cases, Juul pods deliver around 200 puffs, which provides the same amount of nicotine as a pack of 20 cigarettes. And what's more concerning is that research has shown that many young Juul users are unaware that these e-cigarettes contain nicotine. Juul threatens the tremendous progress we've made in reducing teen smoking rates to what was an all-time low of 10%. Mr. Myers, let me ask you, what enables Juul devices to deliver higher levels of nicotine than cigarettes?
I think this is an issue on which we all agree. Juul developed the science of using benzoic acid to turn nicotine into nicotine salts that delivers nicotine more efficiently, more rapidly, and allows smokers and young people to inhale more intensely because it eliminates the harshness. So what it means is that we have the double whammy. We have sweet flavors that attract kids to get them to try it, and then we have new technology that addicts kids more rapidly and more intensely than we've had before.
Thank you. Ms. Furman, let me ask you. In 2009, I helped pass the Family Smoking Prevention and Tobacco Control as a member of this committee. This legislation banned flavors in cigarettes since they were being used to attract kids. In the current e-cigarette epidemic, we're seeing a repeat of this industry tactic. In fact, nearly 97% of teen e-cigarette users reported using a flavored product in the last month. Last year, I was one of the first House members to call on the FDA to ban flavored e-cigarettes, and I'm pleased to co-sponsor Chairman Pallone's Reversing the Youth Tobacco Epidemic Act, which would ban flavors in e-cigarettes. Ms. Furman, in addition to flavors, what other marketing tactics have e-cigarette makers used to target children?
That's a great question. There are many. Flavors are the primary marketing tactic because it prevents the kids from perceiving harm. They don't think that there's anything harmful with gummy bear. They've also been targeting the kids on social media. They have hashtag vape tricks. The kids actually now have started taking over now that Juul has stopped their own social media accounts. Now there are hundreds and thousands of kids who actually do their own vape tricks. The size, the fact that they're deceptively innocuous. You can have them on a desk and they look like a highlighter or a flash drive. So all of these marketing tactics and the fact that they can get them over the counter, they're available online with no age verification. Juul has a very strong age verification now, but many brands like Eon Smoke does not. So kids can order them and get them in 2 days, or they can go to the corner store.
Social media, YouTube videos, and teen-oriented magazines, the sky is the limit with this.
Exactly, and homework websites, as I said. Homework websites, social interaction apps, and games. They all advertise on those as well.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
The gentleman yields back. Now I'd like to recognize the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Hudson, for his 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. First, I'd like to echo the sentiments of my colleague, Representative Butterfield, and I'd like to ask unanimous consent to insert for the record the 2 letters he referenced from the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives and the Law Enforcement Action Partnership. And I share his concerns that if we outlaw specific tobacco products, such as menthol, it will lead to illicit trade of tobacco products. I have a bipartisan bill with Representative Sheila Jackson Lee aimed at curbing this very practice around the globe. According to the Department of State report, the illicit trade in tobacco products funding for criminal activities, including money laundering, bulk cash smuggling, and the trafficking of humans, weapons, drugs, antiquities, diamonds, and counterfeit goods. I do not believe it is good policymaking to ban illegal products unless it is the last viable option because of these concerns. If we deny consumers access to products, they may turn to the black market to find their desired product and drive consumers away from regulated tobacco products. Dr. Siegel, I've read your testimony, and I would like to hear a little bit more from you on our shared goal. I think everyone here agrees there's an epidemic with youth using e-cigarettes. We all agree we want to combat that. Could you just talk a little bit more about what you think are the most effective ways to achieve that goal of stopping youth from using e-cigarettes?
Sure. I think that the key is to make these products non-addictive. I think that's the key, because prior to Juul, we didn't have a problem of addiction. Kids were using these products socially, at parties, only on occasion. And it's only after Juul and its copycat products that we start to see addiction. And so I think regulating the nicotine level and regulating the nicotine salt formulations can make these products so that they're not addictive to kids. I think we're being naive if we think that if we ban flavored e-liquids, kids are going to stop vaping. They're not going to. They're going to continue vaping, but they're going to change what they vape. And what they're going to vape is going to be more and more THC. And one thing that hasn't been said today, but is a key statistic that I think everyone needs to understand, is that of regular vapors, kids who regularly vape e-cigarettes, 70% of them have reported vaping THC. And I think that kids are incredibly resourceful, and they will use what products are available. And I think prohibition is going to be a disaster because kids are just going to use what's available. And what's going to be available are the black market products. And right now you can go right on the internet, go to dankvapes.com, say you're 21, and you can get Apple Jacks, banana, birthday cake, blackberry, Blue Dream, Candyland, cherry pie, cotton candy, bubble gum. We talked about bubble gum before. Bubble gum vapes are not really killing anyone, but bubble gum THC products are. And that's where we need to focus our attention. Don't create a new black market. Strictly regulate these products like we do all other dangerous products on the market.
I think you make a good point, especially in light of what I mentioned in my opening statement. According to Monitoring the Future, youth are 4 times more likely to use alcohol and illegal drugs than they are to use e-cigarette products. Are there any additional tools, in your opinion, that we need to give to FDA to help regulate this?
I think that what we need to do is to require the FDA to set standards. And I think that your legislation that you had proposed, I believe last year, would have required them to do that. I think the problem is that the FDA has been sleeping on this issue for 10 years. They've had authority, but they haven't passed any actual safety standards. Instead, they've been essentially taking a prohibitionist approach. It's all or nothing. You have to put in an application and either you're approved or not approved. That's not the way we regulate dangerous products. The way we regulate them is actually passing safety standards. Had they implemented safety standards back in 2013, when I was first calling for it, we would have had limits on nicotine levels and Juul would never have occurred. We need the FDA to be forced to immediately, without delay, set safety standards for these products as you had requested.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And you look at alcohol. Prohibition didn't work. The percent of alcoholics in America is more than before Prohibition now. But we do regulate alcohol at point of sale. And I think ideas like point of sale regulation for tobacco products makes a lot of sense as a way to keep keep these out of the hands of kids. So I appreciate your testimony, and Madam Chair, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. I think it's important for everyone to understand that THC is prohibited by the federal government. So if there's any product that's carrying this poison in it, we have enforcement is really essential in this. I now would like to recognize the gentlewoman, and she is a gentlewoman from California, strengthful and gentle, Ms. Matsui, for her 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much, my friend, Madam Chair. Thank you for calling this important hearing, and I'm really pleased that we're examining a truly comprehensive bill to address the epidemic of youth smoking and e-cigarette use. While we know the Tobacco Control Act of 2009 was a historic piece of legislation that finally gave FDA regulatory authority over tobacco products, the current epidemic shows we have lots more work to do. One area this committee must address is youth's ability to purchase tobacco products online. A simple web search shows that there are thousands of websites selling tobacco products via the internet, often with differing standards for how they verify the age of their customers. If we decide to raise the tobacco purchasing age to 21, but any child can go online and purchase e-cigarettes, we risk exposing millions more children to these dangerous and addictive products. I understand that there are existing requirements for selling tobacco products online, but that current age verification practices have not solved the problem. Mr. Myers, can you describe how the current online age verification for tobacco works and how it fails to prevent all youth from accessing tobacco products, including e-cigarettes and e-cigarette accessories via online sales?
Certainly, and it's a very important issue because the data shows that the number of e-cigarettes sold online is equivalent to the number sold in vape shops. So it's a substantial number. We have, as we know, a wide variety of rules governing this issue, so that even if one company has good age verification rules, many companies do not,
Right.
and they're equally circumvented with regard to it. It's one of the reasons why, with cigarettes, we looked at both restricting online sales and working with those who deliver them to do it. It's an incredibly important issue, and it's extraordinarily difficult to get to as long as you allow any online sales.
Okay. Late last year, FDA announced it would take new steps aimed at curtailing illegal underage use of e-cigarettes by implementing soon-to-be-announced heightened age verification measures for online sales. We are still waiting on such explicit direction from the FDA, and I'm curious if regulatory threat and public pressure alone have been enough to crack down on illicit online sales. Ms. Furman, you mentioned that your son was able to purchase his e-cigarette on eBay, which does not require any age verification, and that he was able to find other websites that sell e-cigarettes without any age verification. Can you explain how kids and teens are finding these websites?
It's very easy. You just do a Google search.
Okay. Absent federal action, states like California are taking their own initiative to increase age verification requirements for purchasing vaping products online, and it's clear that there remains a urgent need for federal action. I really believe that Mr. Myers is saying what nobody wants to talk about, but might be really required here. FDA has already found that menthol cigarettes likely pose a greater public health risk than regular cigarettes, but the agency has not moved forward with an outright ban on these products. Dr. Gardner, and I appreciate you from the University of California, I'm an alum. Thank you very much. I want to thank you for shining a spotlight on the social injustice issue at hand, wherein menthol disproportionately impacts poorer communities, marginalized groups, youth, and communities of color. Dr. Gardner, what have we learned about the impact of local restrictions on selling menthol products? In your opinion, how should these lessons inform federal regulatory decisions moving forward?
I mentioned it in part in my testimony, and thank you for the question. There have been over 221 local flavor restrictions around the country, 26 of them specifically restricting the sale of menthol all around. It hasn't led to any criminalization or increased arrests of anybody. None of that has taken place. As we actually speak, last week the Fremont City Council in California passed comprehensive legislation. Of course, San Francisco has passed legislation about this. Let me just take a moment and say that the suggestion that somehow this is a black cigarette or that disproportionately affecting, it would be bad for African Americans. It's been the predatory marketing of these things that have led to the problem. I didn't mention this in my testimony, but African Americans die disproportionately of tobacco-related diseases, heart disease, lung cancer, and cerebrovascular disease or stroke. So that's why we want to get it off the market. It has nothing to do with this. And lastly, the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Officials and its counterpart, LEAP, are all funded by the tobacco industry. Let's make no mistake about that.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your testimony, and I yield back.
Thank you, ma'am.
The gentlewoman yields back. It's now a pleasure to recognize the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Mullen, for his 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for a panel that's willing to take their time and come up here to Capitol Hill and give your testimony. We appreciate that. I want to make it very clear. I have no dog in this fight. I don't drink. I don't use any drugs. Never have. I don't use any tobacco products. But I do believe that it's the role of this body to create an environment for entrepreneurs to be able to perceive their dreams and consumers to have choice. I also think it's very hypocritical that in one hand we're talking about banning flavored e-cigarettes, and on the other hand, most of the people that are for banning are also for legalizing marijuana. I mean, if you're talking about targeting kids, let's talk about the whole product and what is actually being targeted. If we're going to talk about this, let's have an open and fair conversation about it. What brought this into a hearing to begin with was because of the death and sickness that e-cigarettes has brought, but what hasn't been discussed is that most of those individuals was buying illegal cartridges laced with THC. So why is it that we're just focusing on one area? I don't like any of it. I choose not to use any of it. But we are a free and balanced country that allows consumers to make the decision, and we're old enough to make those decisions. We talk about in this bill from age limits, raising it to 21. As I said, I don't have a dog in this fight, but we allow men and women to choose to die for this country at 18, and now we're saying they're not smart enough to decide if they're going to smoke or not. I get the point, but there's some hypocrisy that goes along with this, and I just have a hard time understanding it from the onset. We need to have the full conversation. We want to take these products and we want to put them off the reach of children, but we already know they're able to get THC lace cartridges online. Do you think that's going to stop them? Do we think that's not going to happen? Do we not think that's where the products are going to move to? And then there's going to be absolutely no oversight of it? They're still going to be inhaling it. It's still going to go into their lungs. Let me ask, Mr. Myers, let me ask you a question. Have we seen sales increase or decrease on the black market with the THC cartridges?
We actually don't track, because we don't have an ability to track THC, but the issue you raise is important in two different ways, and let me address it, because I don't believe most of the tobacco control advocates out there do support legalization of marijuana with regard to.
No, I'm talking about the people on the bill. I'm talking about on this bill, the most people that are sponsoring this bill are for legalizing marijuana. Not all, but most.
But you know, it's important not to confuse two separate issues. One is we have an epidemic of e-cigarette use among our kids.
No, Mr. Myers, excuse me. It is important to have a full and fair conversation about all of it.
We totally agree.
If you're gonna focus on one area, focus on all of it.
Well,
it still has to do with getting people addicted to a product. It still is called dependency.
So we agree with you. One of the critical factors and one of the reasons we are concerned is that the availability of flavored e-cigarettes has so dramatically increased the number of kids who are addicted to any substance, and
is availability of marijuana too. And go back and look at the states that's legalized it.
Right,
and I'm not trying to make this about marijuana versus anything else. I'm just saying that we got to have a full conversation about all this. I'm not trying to focus on it. I know that's what it sounds like, but I'm just pointing out that we're only focusing on one area. If we're going to talk about kids, then let's have an open conversation. I got 6 at home ranging from the 16 to 8. I don't want to see any of these products either. And one of the biggest issues we have in our schools is that they're going in and they're smoking in the boys' room. Ha song there. And we're having an issue with it where they're having to take the stalls off the doors. And I don't want this product available to anybody. I don't.
Well,
but we can't be kidding ourselves that we think if we just ban this, that it's just going to go away, that the problem's just going to go away. It is absolutely not. Dr. Siegel, where's most of the sales of THCs taking place? Where's the underage kids? Where are they getting the majority of their cartridges for these e-cigarettes to begin with?
They're coming off the black market, and they're coming from large drug dealers who are producing hundreds of thousands of these completely unregulated, and people are buying them off the internet, getting them off the street, and those are being distributed in our schools. And just to be clear, you made this point, that's what's causing this outbreak, not nicotine products that people are buying at stores.
So if you think,
has been very clear about
hold on,
that.
I didn't ask you a question, sir. I didn't ask you a question.
The gentleman's time has expired.
Ma'am, Madam Chair, in all due respect, everybody else has went over
Where
quite a bit.
they haven't gone over by 20 seconds. So you can finish your answer, and then we need to move on. Who was giving the answer?
Dr. Siegel was.
Yeah, I concluded basically
Good,
saying.
okay.
Yeah.
The gentleman yields back.
Thank you.
I'd like to now recognize the gentlewoman from Florida, Ms. Castor, for her 5 minutes of questioning.
Well, thank you, Chairwoman Eshoo, for calling this important hearing, and thank you to all of the witnesses for all of your work. We have a very serious problem in America with this growing epidemic of vaping and e-cigarettes, and I've seen it. My daughters are just in their early 20s, and over the past decade, I watched among all of their friend groups and kids all across middle school and high school as their behavior changed substantially with the uptake of the Juul and e-cigarettes. And this is borne out by the Florida Youth Tobacco Survey run by our Department of Health, found that from 2012 to 2018, there was a 361% increase in kids age 11 to 17 who tried electronic vaping, and a 582% increase in kids that actually continue to use the vapes. And we all know that nearly all tobacco use begins when kids are in middle school and high school. So that this area of what they do to target children and then get them hooked through nicotine and other habit-forming characteristics, I think is ripe for us to do so much more. Now, this bill, reversing the Youth Tobacco Epidemic Act, includes language making it unlawful to market, advertise, or promote any e-cigarette products to individuals under the age of 21. Is this strong enough, the language in the bill? And it gives the FTC enforcement ability, and they can come up with penalties. But I don't know if we're doing all that we need to do. I'd like to have you all go down real quick and just say, it's not strong enough, it is strong enough. We had Dr. Shukat here from CDC and Dr. Shepherdless from FDA. They called it an epidemic. They're doing some things with online and social media, but I continue to think it's not strong enough. What else would you do?
It's a very good start. FDA has authority to regulate e-cigarette marketing up to the limits of the First Amendment. They haven't done so. So that the kind of social media marketing which has fueled this epidemic needs to be the subject of very clear rules to prevent it from happening.
Thank you.
I would echo that. It's a great start. I think the problem now is that kids are marketing it among themselves, so that's also another issue that's going to be hard to follow. And I think that we're talking about reversing the epidemic, the youth epidemic, but if you ban flavors and you slow down the uptake of new kids starting to vape, you still have 5 million kids who are potentially addicted to nicotine, and there's no approved method of cessation, so that's what the next focus should be.
One of the aspects I really like about this bill is that it restricts sponsorships, and that's a big thing that was restricted with the 2009 tobacco control. So it's that Marlboro could no longer sponsor the Indy 500 NASCAR, but right now e-cigarette vendors can. And so that's one very important thing to clamp down on. So it's a great start, and in particular, the sponsorship and avoiding all that is going to be critical.
I think the greatest part of, and thank you, I think the greatest part of the bill is that it, for the first time in 10 years, takes up the question of menthol and prohibits its manufacture and promotion. We know that it's one of the leading causes of death in the African American community. Let me also say, Ms. Eshu, I'm sorry for my interruption. There's just been so much discussion about marijuana that we should at least have the facts right, that 78% of the cases have identified marijuana, but 22 of the cases haven't. We want to have a full discussion about it, then let's have a scientific discussion about it and not make generalizations.
So in answer to your question about the age 21, I don't think it goes far enough. I think what needs to be done is to not only raise the age of sale to 21, but to prohibit the sale of all tobacco products, including e-cigarettes, to stores that are only open to people who are 21 and older. I don't think there's any reason in 2019 that any kid can walk into a grocery store, a convenience store, a drugstore, and buy a pack of Marlboros. I just don't think that in 2019 that makes any sense. I think these should be restricted to tobacco or vape shops. That's where they should be sold, and you can't go in there unless you're 21.
Thank you. I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields back. It's a pleasure to recognize Dr. Bouchon from the great state of Indiana.
Thank you. I appreciate the recognition. Look, I'm a conservative Republican. I'm not normally for government putting in more regulations. But on the other hand, as a doctor, looking at the data, it's pretty clear we need to do something about the e-cigarette epidemic in grade schools and high schools. I have 4 kids. I was a cardiovascular and thoracic surgeon. Most of my patients came to me because they had their end results of cigarette use, honestly. And my daughter, who's in high school, tells me it's pretty pervasive in her school. I'm deeply troubled by the increasing rate of e-cigarette use amongst children. The long-term negative health implications of nicotine use on the heart and lungs are well known, and enticing flavors are attracting teens who might not otherwise have exposure to nicotine. The fact is, high school and middle school students are getting their hands on these products, setting them up for a lifetime of addiction and negative health side effects. And they're not actually going to a legitimate marketplace and buying them. They're buying them from, honestly, high school and grade school dealers in their own colleagues in their classes who are selling these at their schools. In 2018, more than 3.6 million U.S. youth, including 1 in 5 high school students and 1 in 20 middle school students, reported to have used e-cigarettes, and this number is rising, as has been pointed out by multiple witnesses. 2/3 or more of the students don't even realize there's nicotine in the product, a high percentage. The focus of this issue must be on the health of our children. I think it's important not to lose sight of this by using this epidemic to impose excessive and overreaching government regulation broadly. That's why I have supported the Trump administration's proposal to combat the epidemic youth of e-cigarette use by banning flavored options from the marketplace. By removing all flavored e-cigarettes from the marketplace until the FDA can properly review and approve them, if they can, we can get ahead of the epidemic before it's too late. I hope that this committee can continue to build on the leadership of the administration and work together to address this epidemic head-on so that children never need to find out the long-term negative health implications of nicotine and find it out the hard way. Nicotine is extremely addicting. It's almost impossible to get rid of the addiction. In that vein, Dr. Tansky, there you are. If adults want to help quit smoking, they have a number of resources available to them. For example, there are several FDA-approved tobacco cessation medications that have been proven to help adults quit. But for kids, this doesn't seem to be the case. What common treatment options do you recommend to your patients who are addicted to e-cigarettes, and are any tobacco cessation drugs or nicotine replacement therapies proven effective with kids?
Dr. Bouchon, I really appreciate the question. And unfortunately, the answer is we don't have a lot of evidence as to what works well for cessation for adolescents. And with regard to vaping devices, we have no evidence at all because there have not been any studies looking at how to get young people or anybody to quit vaping devices. So we're in uncharted territory, and we actually dramatically and desperately need research and some evidence to support what we're trying to do. We're using our best practice at the moment, and so we're using all the tools that we used for adolescent smoking cessation, including counseling, group counseling. We are using nicotine replacement therapies off-label because we know that some of our young people have very high levels of addiction, and that is a huge area of concern. Kids are suffering. They're withdrawing in class. They're feeling really horrible, and they're getting that bloom of anxiety and irritability, and they're having a really hard time getting through the day. So we do have a big problem. And to your point, as a cardiovascular surgeon, my husband's a vascular surgeon. We joke that I'm trying to put him out of business.
Yep.
We can't avoid the cardiovascular impacts of these devices, and it took us 40 years to figure out COPD and 40 years to figure out lung cancer. And I'm confident, unfortunately, that we're going to see cardiovascular impacts from our youth using these products.
I would agree, and I want to yield the last minute of my time to Ranking Member Burgess.
Thank you, Dr. Bouchon. Dr. Siegel, you had made mention just a few minutes ago about FDA perhaps missed an opportunity in 2013 to regulate the amount of nicotine. I just wanted to point out to the committee, much has been made about the passage of the Tobacco Control Act, but remember, Tobacco Control Act contained a user fee. And so the FDA cannot say that it was resource constrained because since the inception of the Tobacco Control Act, they've collected over $5.5 billion. And I don't know that we have good oversight as to how that money has been spent, but it certainly could have been spent in some of this activity. I realize that vaping doesn't have the user fee, but if the purpose of the FDA and the Tobacco Control Act is to regulate nicotine, they had the money to do so. I'll make this available for the record, and I'll yield back.
The gentleman yields back.
yield back.
I'd like to just make a suggestion that as the ranking member and the chair of the subcommittee, that we write to the FDA and inquire as to how those dollars are being, have been used and continue to be used. I now would like to, I'd like to ask, just circle back for a moment. I did not hear, Dr. Gardner, you said something about the organizations when I said so ordered that the letters be placed in the record, and you made a comment, but I didn't catch it. Can you restate what you said?
I didn't say it directly at the time, but what I said is that the organizations, the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives and LEAP, I'm not familiar with their terminology, both take money from the tobacco industry and actually have for a number of years.
Thank you very much. I now would like to recognize the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Pallone of New Jersey.
Thank you, Chairwoman Eshoo. Whether it's mango, mint, bubblegum, or gummy bear, the wide variety of kid-friendly flavors of cigarettes rival any ice cream shop or candy store. And as we've heard from our witnesses today, that's by design. Tobacco manufacturers know that to attract use early, there's no better way than to give them new sweet flavors to try, and once you've got them hooked, you might just have a customer for life. So it's not just me saying this. Children themselves report that these flavored products are what they use. According to the National Youth Tobacco Survey conducted by the CDC and the FDA, 28% of high school students use e-cigarettes 20 or more days per month, and nearly 70% of those students report using flavored products. So I want to ask some of you, let me start with Dr. Tansky. In your testimony, you described the physical and psychoactive harms that can come from nicotine use, and you describe how nicotine affects the developing adolescent brain. Can you describe how flavors combined with nicotine might influence the drug's addictive properties and the impact this has had for youth users?
Well, I don't know the specific research about it, but it is kind of intuitive that we know that flavors also light up the pleasure systems in your brain. So it's kind of intuitive to assume that if we combine yummy flavors with nicotine, that might be a double whammy. I don't know about the specific research on that topic. That is my hypothesis, and it's supported by anecdote, by seeing so many of my young patients start with flavored products.
But we do have data on the impact of flavors on other parts of the body. Cinnamon aldehyde we know is very bad for your lungs. We know that diacetyl is also bad for your lungs. These are things that are put into e-cigarettes. There's a whole list of them. One thing we didn't talk about in this hearing is that there's a multiplicity of cardiovascular effects associated with smoking e-cigarettes. How they relate to youth, I'm not really sure. But we know that platelet formation, you know, in class, I use the example, if you cut yourself, what happens? And the students all say you bleed. Well, internally, you actually develop platelets. You actually develop, that's the mechanism to stop the bleeding externally. Internally, it leads to blockage of arteries. We know that e-cigarettes do that. So, and I appreciate what's been going on. At some point, we do need to have a full discussion about this. I mean, we're kind of at the surface of this, and I'm sorry to take all your
No, that's
your
okay.
time.
Let me ask Ms. Furman, though. Some people have argued that a flavor ban for e-cigarette products should contain an exception for mint and menthol flavored e-cigarettes, as these products may not be as kid-friendly as fruit-flavored products. But as the parent of a child currently in schools, what are your thoughts on that suggestion? Is it true that teenagers and youth are not using mint or menthol flavored tobacco products?
No, it's not true at all. Actually, some of the samples I brought were different flavors of mint chewing gum or Mighty Mint. Mint is one of the preferred flavors of teens, and if you look at Juul sales of mint and menthol are now over 80% of their total sales, so it's very important. What I think is also important to recognize is that there are other flavors coming out on the market. For instance, Stig has a mentholated mango, so they're combining flavors now. To what Mr. Gardner said, the menthol makes it easier to absorb, easier for the lungs to absorb, easier to addict, so they're adding that mentholated to flavors that are already, you know, commonplace.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I was pleased to see the FDA's announcement that they would soon be conducting some level of enforcement on flavored e-cigarette products that would lead to their removal from store shelves and e-commerce. And more than a month later, though, we still have not seen details of that proposal, and I'm concerned about possible loopholes in the proposed guidance. So, Mr. Myers, can you explain why legislation provides a more complete solution for addressing concerns about flavored products?
Sure. It's very important for multiple reasons. First of all, we have not yet seen a proposal out of the administration that hasn't finally implemented. Our hope is that we will see one very soon and it will be complete. Second, the tobacco industry inevitably will sue the FDA as soon as it files any such rule. They have done this in every case. We need to be certain that this actually becomes the law of the land. Third, a rule adopted is a rule that can be changed. We banned the sale of flavored cigarettes because we knew they attracted kids. It's worked. It hasn't produced a black market. It has helped us reduce cigarette use. We should do the same thing here and be sure that it's not something we have to look back on 10 years from now.
Thank you. I want one more question. Dr. Gardner, you talk in depth about menthol in your testimony, and you say we should recognize the marketing of menthol products as a social injustice issue. Would you just elaborate on that? What's driving the increase in the use of menthol?
It has been going on for decades that prices of cigarettes in the black community, particularly menthol cigarettes, are cheaper. There are more advertisements, and promotions are much more lucrative. That's what's gone on for the last 50 years. That's why 85% of African Americans smoke these products. That's why the majority of African Americans who die of tobacco-related diseases.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
The gentleman yields back. Pleasure to recognize the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Guthrie, for his 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, and thank you for being here today. This is very important. I'm the ranking member of this subcommittee on oversight and investigations, and we had a hearing right before the break on the deaths, the lung deaths coming from vaping. And it seems to be two specific issues that both need to be addressed. One is the flavors and young people becoming addicted to the flavors. I think that is a real problem that needs to be addressed. The second is the THC, that of the 26 deaths, 21 in 21 states, many are due to products containing THC. And even right before the break, we passed a bill to make it easier to bank marijuana. I mean, that's the thing. So as we're trying to restrict access to nicotine products, which I agree with, we're also seem to be not restricting access to marijuana-laced products. And so Dr. Siegel or Dr. Tansky, maybe this might be, do you have, and then flavors, I understand you can buy marijuana gummy bears. I don't know if that's true or not, but if you're saying that the pleasure from flavor and the pleasure from getting intoxicant is combined, then it's combined in that. So maybe we should be looking at banning those products too instead of expanding the access to them. But to Dr. Siegel and Dr. Tansky, do you have concerns about the effects of adolescent brains and their behavior, the development of their brains and behavior from vaping THC?
You go first.
Absolutely, absolutely. I know that we've been testifying that this is an unprecedented increase in what we're seeing, but in reality, there was another unprecedented increase. Just last year, marijuana use among college students rose to its highest level in 35 years. 49% of college students admitted that they use marijuana. We have the legalization of marijuana has led to the perception among young people that it's just not harmful. The policies that we set in society are what tell kids what's harmful and what's not. When they see that this is legalized, their perception of harm has decreased. And that's what's gotten us into this mess with the deaths from respiratory illness, because kids, the increase in marijuana has now transferred into vaping. They've gone from smoking it to vaping it. And because they're vaping it and because they're buying products on the black market that have been contaminated, that's why kids are dying. And I think we cannot ignore that problem. And I think it's naive to think that if we just ban flavored e-liquids, everything's going to be fine. It's not. Kids are getting these products from dealers, from drug dealers in their schools, who are getting them from actual drug dealers. And they're going to continue getting vaping products. They're not going to stop vaping just because the government says you can't sell flavored e-liquids. They're just going to shift over to what's available, which is going to be THC.
Yeah. So, Dr. Tansky, do you have a view on the THC, or anybody here on the panel?
Yeah, so a couple of comments on the THC. I will comment that it is still federally illegal, so that is completely an illicit product, and there is no, in my state, there is no legal sale of recreational THC in the state of New Hampshire.
But Congress just voted to make it easier to bank. I mean, the House did, not Congress, hasn't passed. So we're moving in that direction.
I'm not familiar with the bill.
I know, I'm just saying, so we're going down that pathway.
But to the point, THC is an intoxicant. It is something that makes people higher longer, and it impairs their ability to learn. People get high, and it's not a 2-minute head rush. It's a long day thing. So I think that indeed we're seeing a kind of another epidemic. They're two separate epidemics, and I think we need to think about them in two separate ways, because they really are two very different drugs, and there is no legal recreational marijuana, at least in my state and at the federal level. So whereas nicotine is legally available.
Well, is THC as addictive as nicotine? Would you know?
Boy,
Nicotine very addictive.
Nicotine is very addictive. I'm not an addiction specialist to maybe able to compare the two. So I don't know.
Anybody here, Dr. Siegel?
It's definitely addictive.
It is addictive, but
That's not the question. There's very few things as addictive as nicotine, though, and I guess that's the issue. You opened your statement with the deaths around and I just want to reassert this: 78% of the people with the lung illness have reported THC use. Another 22% have not. They've said they've only used nicotine. So we're going to have to look into the interaction of what's in the actual e-cigarette.
So, yeah, 8 out of 10 have said gross THC, and they would say that it's been self-reporting, so they're not sure if the other doesn't have THC as well. But that's
let's even take it a step further. If you're mixing flavors, as Matt has pointed out, with some of legal products, can't you imagine that there are flavors being mixed with the THC?
Oh, I would imagine so, but THC seems to be common in most of it.
Can I make just one short point, too, that relates to this? One of the reasons we're so concerned about flavors hooking kids on e-cigarettes is the data shows that even if these are kids who otherwise wouldn't have smoked or used other products, it increases their likelihood of moving on to other products.
Like THC gummy bears would be in the same category.
Well, I don't have specific data on THC, but what it does is it demonstrates that there's an increased risk those kids will go on to use other products. So if you're concerned about other addictions,
absolutely,
stopping this one helps across the board.
That one, and not for Congress to move down the path.
Yeah, the gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Siegel, I just want to, you spoke about many issues in one of your answers, but you didn't demonstrate any data that supports it. So would you please get that to us? Otherwise, there's sentences with lots of words in them, but we need factual, We need data.
Well, I can give you
here.
the data.
Yeah, okay, that's what I'm asking for, if you would, please. Not
Absolutely.
now, in writing.
Sure.
To me, please.
Sure.
Now, I would like to recognize the very distinguished gentleman from Massachusetts. It's so wonderful that we have a Kennedy in the Congress, Mr. Joseph Kennedy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to our witnesses for being here for this important hearing. A few weeks ago, I asked the acting head of the FDA what caused a catastrophic regulatory failure that we're seeing play out in our schools and our neighborhoods and our hospitals all over our country. Just a week ago, Massachusetts experienced our own, the first death that we have had in a vaping-related death. More than 1,000 people of all ages are currently sick with a mysterious disease, and our government still cannot diagnose its roots. Our federal government's failure to adequately and proactively address this crisis has had devastating and immediate and long-term impacts, which again, we don't fully understand. Right now, however, patients are sick. Legally operating businesses in Massachusetts are being forced to shutter, with small business owners facing bankruptcy. And our government is scrambling to do what it should have done an awful long time ago. So to each of our witnesses, with the benefit of hindsight, what is the one most important regulatory protection that must be put in place immediately? Dr. Siegel, let's start with you.
I think it's regulating the nicotine levels. I don't think that the nicotine levels in e-liquid should be allowed to be more than 20 milligrams per milliliter. And I think if your formulation is a nicotine salt, it should be even lower than that, probably half of that.
Thank you. Dr. Gardner?
Let me speak to that. Mike has mentioned that a couple of times. There has been a proposal before the FDA to gradually lower the limit of nicotine in cigarettes. So I think it's on the table and it needs to be done. And I will just reiterate what I came to testify about. I think the single most public health benefit that we could get in terms of regulation is getting menthol products off the market. I'll just leave it there.
Thank you, sir.
So we're looking at the retrospectoscope, right? We're going into the Wayback Machine, and in hindsight, what should we have done when e-cigarettes came on the market? Is that the question?
Yeah, what should we have done, but what should we do now?
So I think this bill goes a long way towards addressing what we need to do now by putting strict regulation on these products and addressing age limits and addressing flavors. I think those are absolutely critical. I think that 15 years ago when these first came on the market, we made a lot of mistakes by allowing them to come in as a consumer product and being completely unregulated and allowing these unfettered flavors and access to our kids.
Thank you, Doctor. Ms. Furman?
I would say that the biggest mistake we made was not banning menthol cigarettes, and today I think we should ban all flavors. If we leave menthol cigarettes out of the equation and we ban flavored e-cigarettes, it will allow not only multiple generations of young people to start smoking regular cigarettes with menthol, but it will also create a loophole and a precedent to exempt menthol e-cigarettes from the bill. So,
thank you. Sir?
Let me echo Dorian. I think the critical issue is flavors is which brings people to it. Flavors is how the tobacco industry has addicted generations of people in the African-American community. We need to turn off the on-ramp, and the best way to do it is to eliminate the flavors that appeal to them. But simultaneously, long-term, we need to look at reducing nicotine in combusted tobacco products so that we ratchet that down clearly. And in the interim, we have to make it a priority to figure out how to help young people who are addicted to quit. So it's three things, but you really have to do them all.
So building off your comments, sir, Dr. Tansky, can you tell me a little bit about what nicotine does to a young developing brain, particularly when it's vaped?
So it hits the brain very quickly, particularly the new products where the features of the nicotine get introduced to the brain very, very quickly, kind of analogous to a combusted tobacco cigarette, and it induces this feeling of pleasure. And there's two things that happen. If someone has been using nicotine for a long time, when you don't have nicotine in your body, you feel poorly. You have withdrawal symptoms, you get irritable, you get anxious, you have trouble feeling pleasure. And so you also vape or smoke to avoid withdrawal because otherwise you don't feel normal. So it's this kind of self-fulfilling need. You start with nicotine innocently, you don't think it's going to do anything, you think you're a teenager, you think nothing's bad's going to happen to you, but you start, you get hooked, and then you're stuck in this trap. and you don't feel well until you have more nicotine in your brain. And so that's what addiction is. That's what dependence is. And unfortunately, these products that are in our kids' schools and in our kids' lives have perpetuated significant addiction to nicotine.
And just fleshing that out in the last 15 seconds here, why is that more? Why are younger brains or brains that are not fully developed more susceptible to nicotine?
It's a great question. It's a developmental pattern, and it's the pleasure centers kind of become mature before the inhibitory centers become mature. So they are the addictive potential is much higher with any product in an adolescent brain, whether it's nicotine, THC, anything. The adolescent brain is in this unique developmental period. It's not to do with law. It's not to do with people going off to war. It's to do with brain development, and it's a tempo that doesn't finish until the mid-20s.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back. It's a pleasure to recognize my friend and the gentlewoman from Indiana, Ms. Brooks, for her 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and thank you for holding this incredibly important hearing. While Massachusetts has just had its first vaping death, Indiana sadly has had three. 3 of the 26 that have occurred, as far as I know, across the country. In the 2018 Indiana Youth Tobacco Survey, nearly 1 in 5 high school students and 1 in 12 middle schoolers said they were using e-cigarettes. And I was at an American Cancer Society event while I was home the last 2 weeks, and Dr. Sarah Boslett, a pediatrician, said that it is something that she is having regular conversations with, and she is overwhelmed by the number of kids, which what I'm curious about, Dr. Tansky and Ms. Furman, is it's interesting to me that the kids are actually sharing with you that they are vaping. They are not hiding it. They might hide it in school because they can get in trouble for it in school, but I want to talk a little bit more about where are the kids getting it. I just came from a hearing downstairs on fostering safe internet, fostering a safe internet. And when I looked up a product online as we were passing it out, it asked you the question, are you 21 or are you legal or not legal? Are you 21 or not legal? So truly, where are, having come from law enforcement background, where are the kids getting it? Is it over the internet? How are middle school kids getting it from black markets? Share with me what you know. And Mr. Myers, I want to ask you very briefly about the marketing specifically to the kids. Ms. Furman?
Well, I think when you say when you go online and it says, are you 21 or you not, you click 21 and that's it.
Correct.
Then you can go through and then you can purchase anything. So there's really no verification beyond that except on very few other websites. So they can do it that way. They can get it at a gas station. They can get it at the corner store, and a lot of
Are they not required to provide an ID at a gas station?
they don't ask. A lot of the clerks don't ask, and a lot of the kids have fake IDs, but most of them don't ask. And then a lot of those kids will then purchase them and go to school and sell them to other kids.
And what are they selling them for? How much, roughly?
You know, before when you could purchase online, bulk online, they were the pack of 4 pods is $16, and you could break it up, and they would sell a pod for $10.
Dr.
Now you
Clancy?
can buy them for $2. I just passed around a thing. You can buy the pack of 4 pods is $7.
Dr. Tansky, relative to the pediatricians you're representing, can you share with us what kids are, what they are sharing with them about availability and why they believe they're safe?
So I think the flavors go a long way towards this halo effect that it must be safe, because why would something called gummy bear be harmful to you? And interesting, a lot of the young people don't think that they're vaping nicotine. When you ask kids, are you vaping stuff with nicotine, they'll say, I'm only vaping flavors. But when you actually look at the product or you dig down deeper, you find that indeed they are vaping nicotine and they just don't know. And it is the social pipeline where a lot of the kids are getting these. The middle schoolers are getting them from their older brothers and sisters in the high school. And an 18-year-old high school senior in most states is currently legal to buy vaping products. My son turned 18 at Christmas in his senior year of high school, and on the day of his birthday, people said, hey, will you buy me some vapes? Thankfully, he said no. Otherwise, we would have had some family problems. But this social pipeline needs to be shut off, and that's where Tobacco 21 can be one part of the solution. But the flavors are another critical piece of the solution, because the kids don't perceive something that's labeled as cotton candy or gummy bears as being something that could possibly be harmful.
So Governor Holcomb of Indiana and our State Health Commission are investing $2 million in a public relations campaign to educate schools and kids and so forth. Mr. Myers, can you talk to us about what kind of marketing are you seeing that has made why did the kids believe it's safe? Aside from flavors, how is it that there is nothing that indicates that it's filled with nicotine?
It's the perfect question, is because the FDA rules on advertising have not been applied to e-cigarettes. That this industry, which comes out of Silicon Valley, figured out that if you use social media, we adults wouldn't see it until long after our children saw it. They went back and researched and used the exact same imagery that the cigarette industry used in the 50s and 60s to make it look like it was cool. It's what you needed to be socially successful, happy, independent, and healthy, all of those things. And so everybody in their ads, everybody in the events that they sponsored, looks like they are the quintessential most healthy, happiest, most successful person in the world. You want to figure out how you reach a teenager? They took the tobacco industry playbook and they applied it to precision.
Thank you. I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields back. Pleasure to recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Cardenas, for his 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Appreciate the opportunity for us to have this open and public discussion about this important issue. I'll quote the U.S. Attorney General, the U.S. Surgeon General. The evidence is sufficient to conclude that advertising and promotional activities by the tobacco companies cause the onset and continuation of smoking among adolescents and young adults, end quote. So it appears that the U.S. Surgeon General agrees that there is evidence by his statement that this epidemic is something that we should do something about to protect not only our children but the families as a whole. Dr. Tansky, you've devoted a significant portion of your research to the effects of marketing tobacco products to youth. Can you expand on how tobacco companies historically targeted youth in advertising and why youth might be very susceptible to tobacco marketing?
Thank you for the question. So yes, I've done quite a bit of research on marketing and specifically media mentions and product placement. So back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, even earlier, tobacco companies would actually pay film companies for product placement. So there's no such thing as a Marlboro truck, but there was in the Superman movie. And the little creepy guys from Men in Black, they smoked Marlboro cigarettes. Those were product placements that were, in the first case, paid for. There were things that were documents that were signed. But what that does when things are placed in media, it creates this halo effect. You associate cool characters with the product that they're trying to sell. And movies and media are kind of a super peer, and it's a life that you may not live, but it's out there and it's very attractive. So marketing and media placements are very effective at changing social norms and moving people towards behavioral willingness, which is a term we use to say when people, maybe they thought they weren't going to do it, but now they've seen it often enough or they've heard about it often enough, maybe now I'll try it. They try it because of the flavors or their friend giving it to them, then they get hooked, and now we've got a new patient who's addicted to nicotine.
Most of what you described in those practices by the tobacco industry is pre-digital media.
Mm-hmm.
What tactics do they seem to be using today?
They use a lot of similar tactics, and they also hire social influencers. Influencers are we're all familiar with what they look like. They're the cool people, and they use a product, and then they're basically advertising that product. There's supposed to be rules about them disclosing that they're getting funding for talking about or promoting those products. That doesn't always happen, but that is a place where we know that the tobacco industry and the vaping industry has put some of their effort to try to get these influencers to get their product and the word about their product out.
Okay, Ms. Furman, what types of marketing do you see or that you think parents are having to contend with?
Well, as I said, there's a lot of peer-to-peer marketing now. The influencers who used to be paid, who may still be paid or not, they have hundreds of thousands of views on their vape tricks, hashtag vape tricks. So there's a lot of that peer-to-peer marketing. And then, concerts and events, you see a lot of the placement there. And then, as I said before, homework websites or apps and games that, middle schoolers are playing. So it's prevalent.
Okay. I probably would get voted out of office, but I don't have a problem with increasing the legal age to 25, 26, because
back in the day, we didn't realize as human beings that the human brain is not fully developed until you're in your mid-20s. And now that we have those facts, maybe we should have policy follow the facts and the science. Mr. Myers, President Trump made some kind of claim on this matter. What's the status of that implementation with the administration when it comes to actual actions? I'm sorry.
Yeah, on September 11th, President Trump and the White House announced that they were going to take action within a few weeks to ban the sale of all flavored.
So that statement was more than a few weeks ago?
September 11th. We can all do about 5 weeks ago now.
Okay.
Within a few weeks that they would announce a policy to ban the sale of all flavored e-cigarettes that had not been reviewed by the Food and Drug Administration. Our hope is that they will move and do that as fully and as completely as they said, but they haven't done it yet.
So the president said in a few weeks they were going to come out with something, and it's been more than a few weeks, so it's been at least 5 weeks, and they haven't come out with something. Does anybody at the table know when they are making a harder claim of when that date's coming?
We don't believe that they've announced any hard date.
Well, I personally believe that once again we were duped by this president, because I actually ran into somebody in my district who said, oh, the president's going to do something about it. And I said, no, he just said something. I personally doubt it. I hope for the best, but I personally doubted that there would be follow-through, yet we haven't seen that follow-through. Ms. Berman?
One thing. The First Lady last week met with a group of kids from the Truth Initiative to discuss the youth vaping epidemic. So we are very hopeful that the First Lady and the President will fulfill their promise.
And she's trying to end bullying as well. Thank you.
Oh, come on. The gentleman yields back. Now I'd like to recognize the gentleman from Georgia, the House of Representatives only pharmacist.
Thank you.
For 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank all of you for being here. Obviously, a very important subject, something that we're all concerned with. Dr. Siegel, you mentioned in your testimony that the supply of e-liquids that the youth are vaping is transforming more to the THC products. And can you elaborate on that some and tell us what you see happening here?
Yeah, so I think what's happened is that youth discovered that you can use THC in these devices. And once they discovered that, it became incredibly popular because you can't tell that someone is using it. If you're smoking pot, you can smell it. You can't do that in a school and not get caught. But you can vape THC all you want. The vapor just dissipates immediately, and nobody can tell. In addition,
I never knew that. That's one of the most disgusting smells, is the smell of marijuana that I can imagine. So thank goodness at least we've gotten something done about that.
So because the vaping is heating the liquid, it's not burning it. So that's why it doesn't create a smoke and you can't smell it. The other thing is that you can't look at the e-liquid and tell whether it's a nicotine e-liquid or a THC e-liquid. And so that's why this is becoming so popular, because it's discreet, nobody knows what they're doing, and they're able to get a high without actually having to risk anyone knowing that they're using an illicit substance.
Unbelievable. Can I ask you, have you read this bill? Have you reviewed this bill that's before us today?
I have.
Do you, is it your understanding that the proposed ban on flavored products would apply to just tobacco vaping products, or is it your understanding it would also apply to CBD and to THC products?
No, just nicotine-containing tobacco products.
That's exactly right. It appalls me. I'm going to do something I don't normally do, but I'd like to ask each one of you a yes or no question, okay? Just like to ask you. First of all, I'll start with you, Mr. Myers. Do you think we had sufficient research on public safety before allowing flavored e-cigarette products to enter the market? Just yes or no. Do you think we had proper research?
No.
No.
Not yet, no.
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 All 5 of you said no. And yet here we are, the federal government, whether it be the FDA, and by the way, Dr. Scott Gottlieb wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal last week about the pot legalization makes vaping deadly, about just what you were talking about, Mr. Siegel, about the fact that
that they were using THC and how this is killing people, killing our youth. And yet here we are, in this bill in the federal government, we don't even mention THC in this bill. We mention flavored tobacco, but we don't mention THC. We don't regulate THC. I mean, it's amazing to me, and if you can't tell, this is one of my pet peeves. I'm adamantly opposed to recreational use of marijuana and just think it's awful. And here we have an example of where the inaction of the FDA, of Congress, of not reclassifying marijuana like we should so that research can be done on it. Here we have a national crisis on our hands as a result of that. Any comments?
I think that you make a great point, and I think that, as Dr. Gottlieb wrote in that op-ed, we need to reclassify marijuana so that it can be regulated and so that we can prevent these tragic deaths from occurring. I think part of the problem is that everyone is talking about e-cigarettes, nicotine e-cigarettes, and because of that, kids have completely lost sight of the fact that the THC cartridges are the ones that are causing the death. And because of that, the public's perception is completely wrong. If you ask the public in surveys, they say that they think this is due to nicotine e-cigarettes, not THC. Very few understand that THC is even involved. I think our communications have to be a lot more specific. And rather than THC vaping being the kind of elephant in the room that nobody's talking about, I think we have to directly address that problem.
Anyone else want to comment on that? Mr. Maurer?
I just think it's important to recognize we have two separate issues. We have an e-cigarette youth epidemic.
And I'm not denying that.
And everybody, I think, agrees that we need to do something about that issue. There's the THC issue and the lung deaths bring greater urgency to have as few kids using any of these products as possible, whatever their link is.
And I understand that. It just amazes me that we in Congress continue to ignore the fact that we need to reclassify marijuana, that federal law says that it is against the law and states are approving it. Amazing.
The gentleman's time is expired.
I yield back.
I think it's important to restate again that THC is prohibited by the federal government. It's not just out there floating around that we need to get our arms around. It already is a prohibited substance.
It is prohibited, but there are states that are legalizing it.
Well, I said earlier, before you came back into the room, that we need enforcement of the laws that we have on the books when it comes to THC. But I think that it is a conflation to keep referring to it as if it's the newest shiny object that we have to go after. I think we need to in terms of enforcement, but we have an epidemic on our hands and people are dying. So I appreciate the gentleman's questioning and his participation today. And now I'd like to recognize Dr. Ruiz from the Golden State of our nation, California.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As a physician, I'm all too familiar with the devastation caused by addiction to nicotine. I've seen firsthand the health decline in individuals who tried tobacco as teenagers, got addicted, and never quit. And there's also reports in the emergency department, I'm an emergency physician, of new cases of cardiac pediatric arrhythmias caused by nicotine overdose in much higher frequency than before. While in recent years, smoking cigarettes among teens has continued to decline to the lowest level in decades, on the other hand, vaping rates have skyrocketed, okay? In fact, according to a 2016 report by the Surgeon General, there was a 900% increase in teens vaping from 2011 to 2015, 900% increase. Part of the problem is that many teens and adults think that vaping is harmless, or because the vaping industry want to take addicted cigarette smokers to become addicted vaping smokers, basically increasing their profit share, then people think that it's not as bad, right? And therefore it's safer, i.e. safe, to smoke. And I've spoken about this before. But perhaps it may be slightly safer. It is certainly not good for you to smoke. and it can still injure your lungs. It can still cause cancer. There are carcinogens in vaping products that can cause cancer, period. You know, there's research done on many different types of plant-based kind of properties, and some may have some therapeutic properties, right? There has been research on cannabis, and maybe there's some benefit medically speaking, but there's no benefit for nicotine. I haven't found that research yet to say that nicotine is good for any particular ailment. And it's definitely addictive. It's addictive. So it's devastating that so many young people and many of their parents are operating under an assumption, oh, that these products are harmless, when clearly there are significant health risks that we know about, as well as many that we still yet don't know about, okay? And it is our job to weigh the potential benefits of vaping for people trying to quit nicotine use against the cost, particularly as more teens are using and getting addicted to these harmful products. So as we tackle this issue, we need to do everything in our power to decrease access to these products to underage teens. And while it is certainly common for high school students to get vaping and tobacco products from their friends, many are buying them directly. So we need to get tough on those who are selling to underage teens. Clearly, the current punishment isn't enough to stop retailers from selling to kids, so that means we need to increase the penalties. And I'm working on legislation that would require the FDA to issue a fine for the first offense. Right now, it's just a slap in the hand letter that you get. And then for the fines that are already in place, we're doubling them. And my bill will also require the CDC to conduct much-needed research on the long-term effects of vaping. So if e-cigarettes can be used in specific narrow cases as a tool to help smokers quit combustible cigarettes, quit nicotine, period, it makes sense that we should ensure there's perhaps some safe pathways for smokers to use these devices to end their addiction to nicotine, not transfer the product for their addiction. So like other policies that affect public health, we must let the science be our guide. The first question I think we need to answer is, do e-cigarettes really actually work as a safe tool to encourage smoking and nicotine use cessation? I'll start with you, Mr. Myers.
The answer is the evidence is weak on that point. More than 60% of all e-cigarette adult users also continue to smoke cigarettes, and they don't reduce their risk of disease at all.
In those cases, have there been any literature showing that e-cigarettes can be better than a nicotine patch or the nicotine gums for actually ending the use of nicotine?
There are one or two studies that show that. There are also a number of studies that many e-cigarettes actually decrease your likelihood of success. The failure of any e-cigarette manufacturer to submit evidence to FDA to be objectively evaluated is why we don't know the answer, and why, frankly, the failure of FDA to act is hurting smokers as well as kids.
Ran out of time.
The gentleman yields back. Pleasure to recognize the gentleman from Montana, Mr. Gianforte.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here today. This is a very important topic that's getting an awful lot of attention. I hear about it back home all the time. The bill before this committee is supposed to deal with the ongoing public health concerns about vaping, particularly among children. And I'm pleased that there's a bipartisan agreement on this committee that we don't want children vaping or smoking. There's also bipartisan agreement on this committee that we don't want vapors harmed by dangerous or adulterated substances sold on the black market. The proposed legislation we consider today, however, goes beyond what has been a bipartisan agreement on this committee. Those bipartisan measures included raising the legal age for tobacco use to 21, addressing online sales to prohibit them, and ensuring a known and evaluated product is on sale. We agree on that. Small business owners I talked to back in Montana have told me they're fine with raising the legal age to 21. They supported a similar measure before our state legislature just this year. What concerns them is the effort to ban flavors. We've seen efforts in a handful of places, including Los Angeles, New York, and even Montana, to ban flavors. Shop owners I've talked to worry that even though they're selling products from a known and evaluated supply chain, they'll be put out of business. Furthermore, I worry that efforts to ban flavors will lead to stronger illegal markets with unhealthy, unregulated products, exactly what we aim to avoid in the first place. There's a balance we have to strike here as we responsibly promote public health. I want to get the answers, and I want to hear from the experts, and I want to rely on sound science to make these decisions. We were getting there with our bipartisan work, and personally, I think we should get back to that bipartisan work where we have agreement. I'd like to direct my first question to Dr. Siegel. What evidence is there of cadmium and other heavy metals being involved in the cases of severe vaping-related lung injuries?
Right now, there's none. The most likely cause of this outbreak is tainted THC cartridges that have been laced with vitamin E acetate, which is a new thickening agent that just started to be used by the black market producers late last year. And either the oil itself or something in it is what's likely causing this outbreak.
So and are these products available in shops that are down on Main Street?
No, these are black market products that can only be obtained through illegal sources.
So you believe the challenges we've seen with the cases that have been reported are not from legitimate products that have been provided through a legal supply chain?
I think there's absolutely no evidence that that's the case. I think that these are coming from the black market. They're counterfeit, bootleg, illicit products that are causing this, not products that are sold in retail stores.
Okay. And so I heard some of your testimony earlier, but just to put a bow on it, Dr. Siegel, what advice would you have for this committee on ways to improve the legislation we have in front of us?
Well, I think that banning the flavors, I think every aspect of the legislation is reasonable except for banning the flavors. I think you need to consider what's going to happen if you ban e-cigarette flavors. The first thing that's going to happen is you're going to be putting 16,000 small businesses out of business. You've got to consider that effect. The second thing that's going to happen is you're going to be having forcing 2 million ex-smokers who have already quit smoking using these products to either go back to smoking, which is a disaster, or to turn to an illicit black market, which is also a disaster. And the third thing you're doing is you are causing more youth to turn to THC products because those are the only ones that are going to be available. And you are actually increasing the risk of more cases of this outbreak. But you're doing nothing to actually address respiratory disease that is occurring. You're doing nothing to prevent deaths. You're just putting a lot of people out of business and forcing a lot of ex-smokers to go back to smoking.
Okay, and thank you for that. And Madam Chair, I would just encourage this whole committee, let's get the facts and make decisions based on public health. And with that, I yield back.
May I make a comment in the last couple seconds? Sorry. So one of the things that you mentioned is that we need known and evaluated e-cigarettes, and flavors have not been proven safe. And I think that's something that we need to really wrap our heads around. Many of the flavors are known to cause harm and cause tissue damage and direct tissue damage to the lung. And we have young people who are inhaling them directly into their lungs over and over again every day. And we don't know what the effects are. So known and evaluated is not actually true. And tobacco flavor is still available, yeah.
Thank you. Gentleman has yielded back. I now would like to recognize the gentlewoman from Illinois, Ms. Kelly, for her 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank all of you for your testimony today. In addition to my role on this committee, I'm also chair of the Congressional Black Caucus Health Brain Trust. Because of this, I am invested in working to improve the health of all communities and reducing health disparities, especially for vulnerable and minority populations. Dr. Gardner, in your testimony, you mentioned the impact of predatory marketing and how it disproportionately impacts minority communities. We know that the majority of African American smokers are using menthol products. Not only is the youth tobacco epidemic a crisis, but predatory practices have led to severe disparities in health outcomes, including increased rates of various morbidities such as lung cancer, and heart attacks among minority populations. Can you expand upon the extent of these disparities and its impact on communities of color?
Thank you very much for the question. The impact is actually larger than just the statistics show. We're talking about kids losing parents at an early age in a poor community that doesn't necessarily have health care. So you have to look at, when we talk about unintended consequences, the unintended consequences of the tobacco epidemic in the African American community, frankly, has been somewhat overwhelming and has been going on for years. I want to encourage this committee. The last question about the black market occurring, there in the 26 cities where this has been done, there's no black market that has occurred. And in terms of these folks going out of business, a great study was done. We should share it with the committee. That was done in Minneapolis, where what was the impact? Not one person went out of business. Their sales went down, this is true, but they didn't go out of business. So all this discussion about we need to get the science right, and we need to get this right, I want to encourage that. But I appreciate your question, because we know the facts disproportionately affect black people. When you look behind it, kids are losing parents at an early age. This is leading to folks going to jail for other reasons. The impact is overwhelming, frankly.
And I know of the top 10 diseases that Americans die from. African Americans are number one, I believe, in 8 of the
8 of the 10, right.
8 of the 10 diseases. This is personal for me too, because my son was a smoker and he vapes, but he's not a kid. He's 35 years old. So we go back and forth with him, and it has helped him, stop smoking, even though I bug him every day, every time I hear of something going on. But he differentiates between what he does and what he believes these young folks are dying from, or their throats are being messed up from what he uses. But I still don't get what I don't have the argument back for him.
The distinction that is trying to be made is that vaping heats the oil or heats the something, and while smoking a cigarette or smoking a joint burns it, and you're going to have different chemical reactions. My suggestion to the committee, they both have a specific chemical footprint, and that footprint is different, and that does not necessarily mean that one is healthier than the other. There's still science to be done. I want to encourage, if we're going to really look into the science, to look into when you said it best, when you inhale flavors over a long period of time, what is that going to mean for your lungs? And then the latest data out on the deaths is not so much the concentrated the concentrated juice. There's actually the scarring that's been identified in the lung, and that may be other causes. And one thing we know is that flavors are aldehydes, and aldehydes are irritants, and that may be leading to the scarring. So.
And I don't think he uses flavors, but and he says to me, "Do you want me to go back to smoking?" And I said, "No, but you want to slow."
Do you know he doesn't use flavors?
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, because he's done it at my house, so I should be able to smell it, right? Or no?
No.
I can't.
One of the diabolical.
I mean, he's not going to lie. He doesn't have to lie to me.
One of the diabolical genius parts about this is they've created a mechanism so that you can't smell it on their breath or on their clothes, which is why kids are able to do it in school and not get caught. I mean, it is really troubling. The other issue we don't talk about with menthol that is really important is that menthol is a starter product for kids all across the country. More than 50% of kids who become addicted to cigarette smoking start using menthol products. So if we care about kids all across the board, that's part of the issue.
Thank you.
Gentlewoman yields back. I now would like to recognize the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Bilirakis, for his 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate it. I really appreciate you holding this hearing. It's so very important, and timely. And of course, we have to get it right. But let me be clear: under no circumstances should youth have access to tobacco products. Period. And that's the way I feel, and I think most people feel the same way. So While this committee and the FDA are working to address the real epidemic of youth use of tobacco products and lung injuries linked to illicit black market vaping products, we should also be sure we are not creating unintended consequences that will lead to a future public health crisis or exacerbate the current one. I remain committed, of course, to working with the chair and all my committee members on both sides of the aisle. Dr. Siegel, CDC recently highlighted data showing that cigarette smoking has fallen to historic lows. That's been mentioned in this committee. This is a positive advancement for public health, and we should be providing current adult smokers with more tools. Not necessarily e-cigarettes, but that's why we're having this hearing, to get the facts from the experts. So, but not we want to provide them more tools if they're less harmful to quit and transition to low-risk products. Congress is no stranger to unintended consequences, unfortunately. Could this bill make it harder for current adult users of traditional combustible tobacco products to transition to a modified risk tobacco product? And then let me ask, first of all, can you answer that question, please, sir?
Yeah, this bill, if enacted as it is with the flavored e-cigarette ban, is going to wreak havoc with smokers. It's going to make it incredibly difficult for them to quit smoking by using flavored e-liquids. And it's also going to force many ex-smokers who have already quit to go back to smoking. We know that e-cigarettes are the most effective smoking cessation tool using nicotine. They outperform nicotine patches by double. So the New England Journal of Medicine published a clinical trial published earlier this year, which showed that switching to vaping e-cigarettes is twice as effective as a nicotine patch in helping smokers quit. So this is currently the best option we have for smokers to quit. 2 million of them have quit using flavored e-cigarettes. Why would we want to take that away from them?
Yeah, but we don't want yeah, I agree with that, but again, I don't want my kids or youth vaping. I understand, and we heard it today. I've heard it several times over the last few years that what is it? The nicotine, the amount of nicotine is equivalent to in one e-cigarette or Juul, what have you, a pack of cigarettes. I mean, that's terrible. And then our kids are being addicted, and I just don't see. I think that there's going to be a rise in the future, and we've got to do something about it. But I want to do the right thing. I don't want to just pass a bill and then have the unintended consequences, or pass a bill and we pat ourselves on the back and say we've solved the problem, where we really didn't. So, Dr. Siegel, with recent reports of patients, especially youth, being hospitalized with lung injuries associated with vaping, illicit black market THC, and flavored nicotine home brews, does this bill address this public health concern? And I think I know the answer to that. You've testified, but if you want to elaborate, that would be good.
It doesn't. It doesn't. This is going to outlaw the legal sale by retail stores of electronic cigarettes, of flavored products. These are not the products that are causing the terrible deaths and severe respiratory failure that we're seeing. And in my opinion, it's actually going to make the problem worse, because I think when youth are no longer have access to flavored e-liquids, what the suppliers are going to start supplying is going to be THC, because that's what they can get their hands on.
Okay, well, thank you very much, and I look forward to working with you all. I yield back, Madam Chair.
The gentleman yields back. Dr. Siegel, I'd like to ask you a quick question. Are you representing the public health school at Boston University in your testimony today?
Well, I'm a professor at Boston University.
I know you are, but are you representing the public health school?
Well, when professors...
Or are you here as an individual?
No, I mean, when professors speak, they're not representing the school they come from. They're representing their own opinions.
Oh, okay. Well, that's important for members to understand. Thank you. Now I would like to recognize Ms. Barragan from California for her 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Siegel, you said something earlier that was to the effect that flavors are not the problem. Is that accurate? Is that accurate testimony?
Specifically, what I said is flavors aren't causing the harm.
Okay. So
It's
I
not
just
that they're
wanted to
not a
clarify.
problem. I mean, they're,
Okay.
of course they're the
Well,
problem.
okay, I have a
Okay.
question that's going to follow. So I think the issue here is, do you believe that flavors are hooking children so that they then become dependent on nicotine? Do you believe the flavor hooks them?
No, I think
You
it's the
don't.
nicotine.
Do you think that the flavor attracts our young people to then vape?
Of course.
Okay, so at least you admit that there is some attraction, that the flavor is what gets them started.
The flavor, I mean, first of all, you have to understand there is no such thing as a non-flavored e-cigarette.
Okay,
There's
so
no
it's-
such thing.
Let's talk about the fruity flavors. Do you
Okay.
you think that the kids see the fruity flavors and because of that they say, I'm going to vape?
Yeah, I think that makes it attractive, absolutely.
Okay, so I just want to make sure we're on the same page, because you kind of sounded like, well, the flavors aren't a problem, why are we going to get rid of them? Yet we know the Surgeon General in 2015 actually warned that tobacco companies were known to use fruity flavors to hook children. And there was a survey that was done by the FDA and the National Institutes of Health of young people, and they asked them why they did it. More than 80% of the children marked the answer that says, it comes in flavors I like. So I think that, for me at least, is clarified, because it was sounding to me like you didn't make a connection at all on why there would even be a discussion about why we wouldn't have the flavors anymore. I also was a little shocked when I was doing some of the research to see that the FDA actually warned about this problem and this issue in 2015, and they drafted a ban. So you had made you had provided some testimony that the FDA has to come up with regulations. Well, in 2015, the FDA actually came up with a draft ban on the flavors. What ensued after that draft ban was more than 100 tobacco industry lobbyists and small business advocates met with the White House over the course of 46 days. And when you took a look at the number of public health advocates, it was like 7. And it's pretty remarkable then to see when the actual rule came out, the ban on flavors was gone. So this isn't the first time the FDA has looked at it, and then we have seen some result, unfortunately, that it got stripped out. And we know the power of advocates and lobbyists and the industry. You don't have to look too far than the tobacco industry. Mr. Gardner, Dr. Gardner, you brought up an issue that's very near and dear to me. I represent a district that includes Compton and Watts. It's a district that's almost 88% Latino African American, and many of my colleagues have talked about it already, is the use of menthol cigarettes. And we've already spoken a lot about it, but do you have any idea what the impact on smoking rates for children of color might be if the menthol ban from this legislation goes into effect?
We actually do. There's some great research done at the in 2011 by Levi and company that shows that if it just 30% of the people that are using these cigarettes, just 30%, not many more, if 30% of people stopped using these cigarettes, 500,000 lives would be saved, and as it relates to African Americans, over 250,000 of lives would be saved. I think that says it all. I can't say it any
Great, thank you, Doctor.
Can I say something about the menthol?
Sure, please do.
The menthol, the flavor. In 2016, it was the deeming regulations were put forward by the FDA, bringing all the products under their roof. There were 19 pages on flavors and why flavors should be restricted, and menthol was part of that. Those, and maybe it was 16 pages, it was 19 pages. They were all redlined by the Office on Management and Budget. That's why the deeming regulations. So they tried.
Right.
So there's been some try. So we haven't. This is another shot at another bite at the apple. As we.
Great, thank you, Mr. Myers. With about 10 seconds left, I was pretty outraged to hear about the advertising on our youth. What impact would this legislation have on advertising for vaping products and e-cigarettes? if this is passed?
It would have a dramatic impact, and it would curtail much of the kind of advertising that the industry has used to make these products so appealing and so attractive to youth, and made them undo the denormalization we did with cigarette smoking.
Great, thank you. I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields back. Mr. Rush of Illinois is now recognized for his 5 minutes of
I
questions.
want to thank you, Madam Chairman, and to all the witnesses. It's been a very informative hearing that we've had today. Dr. Gardner, I'm just kind of astounded by some of your conclusions. I think that you're right on point, and there is a familiar saying, you might have heard it, that when the white community gets a cold, the black community gets pneumonia. I've found that to be relatively true. And I understand the whole issue around menthol flavored cigarettes and how they have adversely affected the African American community, and how the marketing has been predatory as it relates to the African American community. But maybe I'm old school. I just have not seen the issue of vaping to me is widespread, and to me one of the alarm factors as it relates to the African American youth. That's not to say that it doesn't exist. I just have not seen it rise up in my district, which is majority African American. When you consider that most of the issues in my district centered around gun violence, then vaping has not really kind of skyrocketed to the forefront. But because I'm ignorant of it, I ask, will you kind of explain to me what is the state of the preponderance of incidents of vaping that's occurring in my district and other districts?
It's a great question. It's right on point. I like to look at it this way. In the black community, folks are doing marijuana, folks are doing little cigars and cigarillos, and smokes are smoking menthol cigarettes. But just like what happened with the skateboarding, remember 40 years ago, black folks weren't doing those skateboards. Today they skateboard. Okay, so this is happening as we speak here. This comes up all the time because I travel around the country, and you go to the high school, kids are doing it. And kids are then doing it with their little cigars too. So it's happening. The data right now shows that it's less than in white communities, like the cold and pneumonia thing. That's correct. But that is changing. I love the skateboard analogy. Unfortunately, we have anecdotal evidence from Arkansas, from Georgia, and parts of Florida where there are concentrations of blacks, particularly in Georgia around some of the HBCUs, where there's some disproportionately high rates of e-cigarette use. Things are changing. I think this bill would help to maybe nip that in the bud. Excellent question. Excellent.
Gentleman yields back.
All my questions have been asked and answered already, so I do yield back.
I now recognize the gentlewoman from Illinois, Ms. Schakowsky, for 5 minutes of questioning.
As always, I thank the chairwoman for allowing me to participate in this hearing, though I'm not a member of the subcommittee. I'm very concerned about this. It appears that at least the first reported death was from my state of Illinois, and subsequently we're talking about 1,300 people hospitalized and 26 deaths because of e-cigarettes, and sometimes cause not exactly known. We know that last year almost 5 million middle and high school students indicated that they were using some form of cigarettes, including e-cigarettes, and I think that number is on the rise. I think Dr. Gardner could talk to us about that, but I wanted to focus right at this moment on Ms. Furman, and I want to thank you for your very personal testimony and your personal experience and the willingness that you have to share it. If you could talk to Juul's CEO right now, or the CEO of any of the other e-cigarettes brands, what would you tell them about the impact of their product on your family and so many others?
I would, the impact it's devastating. It was difficult on our family. However, there are so many families across America who are experiencing so much worse, not even mentioning the lung illness, which is a cause and comes out of this. There are families who are dealing with kids who are so severely addicted. They have explosive anger issues. They're breaking things. They're throwing things. They're getting kicked out of school. They're losing scholarships. They're being kicked off the sports team. I mean, it's a huge issue. And there's no, as Dr. Tansky said, there's no FDA-approved cessation method. So even if you take these flavors away, and I do want to add that we are leaving tobacco flavor, the bill leaves tobacco flavor on the market. So as Dr. Siegel said, smokers who are using flavors don't have to go to the black market. They can use a tobacco vape. It's not like we're banning these vapes, but something really has to be done. And the flavors, taking those off the market, is the first step.
Thank you. Mr. Myers, as chair of the Subcommittee on Consumer Protection and Commerce, I'm very focused on leveraging the Federal Trade Commission's authority to protect consumers from deceptive business practices. How do you believe the FTC could better investigate big vape and big tobacco?
I think the FTC's Division of Advertising Practices could do much more. There is no question that the manner in which these products are being marketed is misleading kids into believing that these products are much safer than they are, and in many cases safe. They're also misleading kids into believing that they don't have nicotine with regard to that, so that if the FTC uses its authority over false and deceptive advertising, I think it could be much more aggressive in preventing these companies from misleading our youth. It's what they did with tobacco 30 years ago. They need to be at least as vigilant, if not more so.
Thank you. Dr. Gardner, the e-cigarettes initially were quit smoking tobacco, and this will be a help. But what I want to know, are we actually developing more smokers by creating a nicotine addiction and making it all right? I mean, I worry that these young people who may be vaping now for the rest of their lives may be smoking tobacco cigarettes.
That's an excellent question. I think it goes something like this. There are more people getting on the on-ramp that are getting off the off-ramp, and that is a problem that we're facing with the electronic cigarette situation here. Let me just say something about the cessation thing. It's true the New England Journal of Medicine published a great article that showed that using e-cigarettes allowed people to quit. That's true. There's been somewhere in the neighborhood of about 35 of these type of studies done. Somewhere in the neighborhood of 27 have shown that they don't really work that well. There's some that should work, and think of it this way. If you regulated the nicotine in it, if you got rid of the flavors, if you decreased the dose, if you couldn't buy it over the line, if there weren't 15,000 flavors available then maybe it could actually serve as a cessation device. Right now, it's like a candy bar. Okay, and it can buy it in many number of different flavors. So as it's currently done, I think we have a problem. More people are getting on than they're getting off.
Can I just say, I think since you mentioned the 37 other studies, I think it's only fair if you tell the Congresswoman how many of those 37 studies were clinical trials.
Yeah, my time has expired, and so I yield back. Thank you.
Ms. Schakowsky, thank you for joining us and the excellent questions. What I'd like to do now is to thank each one of the witnesses on behalf of all of the members of the subcommittee. We've been, let's see, 3 hours. 3 hours. So thank you for your patience. Thank you for the substance and the content of your testimony. This is a real challenge for our country. And these are issues that really an individual can't address all by themselves. This really calls out, I think it cries out for strong public federal policy, and that's what the American people deserve. We know how we made progress relative to tobacco and addiction, and now we're right back to addiction again. So I think that we have a roadmap that we can follow. And I look forward to working with all the members of the subcommittee. And again, I thank you for, for being with us today and the work that brought you to the table. It's nothing short of extraordinary. I'd like to place in the record the following documents: a letter of support from the American Dental Association, coalition letter from the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids et al., a letter of support from the National Medical Association, letter of support from the National Association of County and City Health Officials, statement of support from the American Cancer Society and Cancer Action Network, statement of support from CVS Health, and a statement of support from the American Osteopathic Association. So I'd like to ask for unanimous consent.
Without objection.
To thank the ranking member. And with that...
May I be recognized for unanimous consent request?
Certainly.
So I have unanimous consent to put into the record a letter from the Texas Food and Fuel Association. And I would also like to submit for the record the data I had on the taxes collected by the Center for Tobacco.
So ordered. I want to remind members that pursuant to the committee rules, they have 10 business days to submit additional questions for the record to be answered by the witnesses who have appeared today. And I ask each witness to respond promptly to any such questions that you may receive. So at this time, with gratitude again to the witnesses, the audience that stayed for the duration of this important, lengthy hearing, the subcommittee is now adjourned.